I'm a woman in my mid-50s, living alone. I'm not sure how to unfold this story. I can't talk to anyone, so I'm speaking out in this anonymous space. I'm sure many of those who hear my story will blame me, but I've been suffocating because I wanted to let it out somewhere. My husband is on a business trip abroad. We have 2 children, one is married, and the other is still single but living independently. My husband and I are a remarried couple. Before I met my husband, I had divorced my ex-husband and was living alone raising a child. My husband was also a single father raising a child alone. We happened to meet and combined our households. The married child is the one I gave birth to, and the one living alone is the one my husband had with his ex-wife. They are both my sons. Once I made my 2 children independent, the loneliness was indescribable. And then my husband was dispatched to an overseas branch, leaving me alone, and I was so lonely. My friends were all busy. There are regular gatherings I attend, but there was no one there I could open up to. Looking at my cell phone was my daily routine. It was so lonely being alone in an empty house that I even joined a badminton club. It felt good to exercise and feel light, but it didn't solve the loneliness. One day, I started chatting with people through an app on my cell phone. Since you're talking to people you don't even know, I felt good because I could open up and talk to them. Initially, I mostly chatted with men of my age. Young men would stop chatting when I revealed my age. During that time, I started talking to a man about the same age as my son. He was younger than my second son, who became my son after remarriage. Even though he knew my age, he didn't leave and continued to chat with me. He told me he liked talking to women his age. I thought it would be a brief conversation, but it lasted longer than I thought. He's a young man, a newbie in society who just graduated from college. He won't understand my story, I thought, and I tried to listen to his story. I told him to say whatever he wanted to say, but while we were chatting, I found myself complaining about my loneliness to him. He listened to me well. I had been chatting with him for a few days when he suddenly wanted to make a phone call with me. So I gave him my phone number and he called me. We talked for a long time and ended up meeting because we didn't live far apart. What would I do meeting a man who's like a son? He listened to my story well, so let's treat him to something good. Thinking this, I went to the meeting place with him. I was shocked almost to the point of collapsing at the meeting place. The man I had met and had been chatting with on the mobile app turned out to be my son, the child born between my husband and his ex-wife. I thought my son was there because he had another commitment. I was surprised to see him, but in an attempt to act naturally, I asked him what brought him there. He smiled and said he was there for an appointment. I told him to take care of his business and that I also had an appointment. I was about to leave, but he asked me to sit down for a moment. I told him I had an appointment and needed to go quickly, and I sat down. Tommy alias told me something surprising. He said he was the one who had been chatting with me and had arranged to meet that day. I was so embarrassed, I didn't know what to do. I had told my chat partner for days that I was very lonely. I also said a lot that I was lonely as a woman. What did I say when we were chatting? I was out of my mind, trying to recall the contents of our chat. I was extremely embarrassed that I hadn't realized it was Tommy, who is like a son to me, even when we were on the phone. When I asked about the phone number, Tommy said he had called me with the mobile phone he uses at work. I couldn't even hear what Tommy was saying. Then, when I calmed down a bit, Tommy asked me if I had been very lonely. He said he was bothered a lot by his brother getting married and living independently. He said he felt relieved because his dad was with his mom when he became independent, but he was very worried about me when his dad also went abroad. He said he had been chatting with me on the app for a long time and thought, could it be because our situations were so similar? He said he thought, no way. But when he had a phone call with me, he realized that the person he had been chatting with was me. Tommy apologized to me. He comforted me by saying that he also had responsibility for making me feel lonely. He asked me to consider him not as a son, but as a person I met through the app, and to tell him everything I wanted to say. He said if I met another man through such an app, there could be dangerous situations, and I felt very sorry and embarrassed in front of my son. Tommy smiled and said, since we're on a date today, let's enjoy it to the fullest and eat something delicious. Unknowingly, I felt at ease and had a comfortable conversation with Tommy. Tommy also shared his concerns with me, saying that he's too busy and tired from work to have time for a relationship. We spent time talking about each other's concerns and listening to each other. As a joke, I asked Tommy, why would a young man meet an older woman like me through such an app? Tommy just turned red and laughed, unable to answer. I told Tommy that the reason why a young man meets a woman is obvious, but when I asked if he ever thought about meeting a woman the same age as his mother, Tommy just turned red again. I found Tommy's reaction amusing, so I kept teasing him. Tommy said, okay, I don't care about a woman's age. Do you want to embarrass me like that? We made a lot of jokes like, our Tommy doesn't care about the age of women. Tommy and I had a heart-to-heart conversation. That day, after the date with Tommy, we came to our house together. Tommy apologized for not coming home, often saying he didn't know when was the last time he came home. We had a conversation over a beer until late at night. The next day, Tommy said he would come to our house on his way home from work. I prepared delicious food for Tommy, and I had a lot of conversations with Tommy that day. I felt like my loneliness had disappeared. Tommy listened to everything I said and understood me. When the weekend came, I went on an outing with Tommy. The weather was nice that day, and I felt really good. We had a meal at a restaurant by the beach and had coffee at a cafe overlooking the sea. It got dark and I was still tipsy from the alcohol I had during dinner. Tommy and I decided to spend the night at a hotel on the beach. Tommy was happy to talk with his mother until late at night and then go to sleep. I thought it would be boring for him to listen to an old woman's story, but Tommy looked so beautiful saying that. We went into the hotel and had a conversation over a beer. Tommy was so pretty and lovely that day, listening to everything I said. While drinking, I cautiously asked Tommy why he even thought about dating an older woman. I asked if he thought of a much older woman as a woman, and Tommy opened up. Tommy said he likes older women. I was very surprised. I told Tommy that he might have thought that because he didn't have a girlfriend. Tommy asked me why I even thought about meeting a much younger man. I honestly said that I was very lonely these days and wanted to meet him because we got along well in our conversations. Tommy asked if I would have considered dating a younger man if the person I was talking to wasn't him, and I was very embarrassed. Tommy told me that it's okay for a mother like me to feel lonely because I'm a human being too. I really liked Tommy's words that comforted my heart. I asked Tommy if he wanted to meet an older woman with that kind of intention, and Tommy nodded. Then Tommy asked, "What about you?" I didn't want to lie to Tommy. I honestly said, even though the person I was talking to was a young man, I wanted to meet him because our conversation went so well. If I didn't feel bad about meeting him, and he filled the emptiness in my heart, I think I would have done what he wanted. That's what I said. While saying this, I was worried that Tommy might think I was strange, but Tommy understood me. Tommy said he didn't even want to imagine me having mental issues because of loneliness. I thought, is there anyone else in the world who cares about me like this? I was deeply moved by Tommy's words, so I told Tommy that I would do anything he wanted. I unknowingly said this and was surprised at myself. I spent time with Tommy without sleeping until dawn. From the next day, Tommy started living in our house. I prepared delicious food for Tommy, who may not have been able to eat properly while living alone. Thanks to Tommy, I was not lonely in body or mind. Tommy also said he was very lonely living alone. He said it was very hard to go back and forth between work and home without even having time to date a girlfriend. I asked Tommy how about dating a girlfriend, but Tommy said it would be hard to have to devote a lot of time to date girls of his age, so I had no choice but to nod. Meanwhile, I found out that Tommy has been using the app we met recently. I was a bit upset, but I pretended not to know because it was something I couldn't say anything about. I also occasionally had conversations with various people through that app. I was just having a conversation, but I couldn't know what Tommy was thinking when using the app. One day, I asked Tommy. I asked if girls my age were your type, and Tommy said yes. Then I asked if he would like to meet a friend of mine who is living alone and feeling lonely after sending her husband to heaven. Tommy declined by shaking his hand. I asked my friend if she would like to meet a young man who said he likes women our age, and she said yes. Tommy said no, but after I mentioned it a few times, he reluctantly followed my advice. It seems that Tommy is getting along well with my friend. I didn't ask Tommy anything because Tommy is doing his best for me. My friend thanked me a lot. She said she's been enjoying life a lot since I introduced her to a thoughtful young man. I asked my friend to keep all this a secret, and she said okay. Then Tommy told me something surprising. It was to meet my friend when Tommy and I were dating. He lightly suggested having a good time together, eating and drinking coffee, but I couldn't respond to Tommy. I didn't know what Tommy was thinking. My friend thinks it would be fun to meet the three of us. It would be great to eat, drink coffee, laugh and chat together. But I hesitate because I don't know what Tommy wants, what my friend is thinking. There are hardly any such cases in the world. You can curse me. I'm leaving my story that I can't tell anyone here.
I took nuclear revenge on my boss who cheated with my wife and then filed for divorce. A 20-hour journey from Singapore to O'Hare International with a layover in Taipei was barely better than economy class. Even on my birthday, I wasn't fazed by returning to Chicago for a tough meeting with our international stocks head and shares trading desk. What worried me was anticipating what awaited me at home. We landed just after 8:30 a.m., and I took a shuttle to the nearby Chicago Sheraton and Suites Hotel. Having booked the room the night before, it was ready for immediate check-in. After dropping my belongings, I showered and hit the gym. I worked out for an hour, then took a long, hot shower followed by a cold rinse to wake up fully. Despite the chilly April weather in Chicago, I endured the cold until my teeth chattered, then warmed up with hot water. Feeling refreshed, I went to the restaurant for an American breakfast I'd missed for months. After devouring pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, and sausage drenched in maple syrup, and 4 cups of coffee, I headed to my 10:30 appointment at JP Morgan on Dearborn Avenue. I took the elevator to the 8th floor, showed my ID, and was escorted to a small conference room. They kept me waiting for over 17 minutes, during which I didn't move a muscle. From my trips to Asia, I learned to show no fear or weakness. Joe Rutledge, VP of International Stock and Commodities Traders, and Samuel Young, our corporate lawyer, eventually entered. Their presence signaled someone was getting fired, and it was me. "Adam," Joe began without a handshake, motioning me to sit. The confrontation began. "What happened in Singapore?" Joe demanded. "We sent you to stabilize things, and you approved a $300 million purchase of a new company's stock with no solid data." "Yes," I replied. "Yes to what?" Joe's face reddened. "Yes, it's in my report. The CEO and management team are top-notch with 200 years of experience. The project, 50 years in the making, is confirmed by Deloitte and KPMG. The aquaculture project is technologically advanced and has real potential." "Then why is their share price falling?" he asked. "It went public at $17 a share and now it's $9.55 and you bought more." "Yes, because it will rebound. If it reaches $25, we'll profit significantly, Joe. We own 25% of the shares, making us the largest shareholder in the company," I retorted. "Because competitors are short-selling to sink the company or buy it cheaply. We need to stand our ground." "It's a failure," he said. "We need to trade on confidence and maintain a positive risk ratio." "It's all in my report," I reiterated. "Your report is wishful thinking," he said. "The council has approved my recommendation. You're out." Samuel offered me 3 months' salary and nearly 30 days of accrued vacation, totaling almost 5 months of pay. They also cashed in my stock options, bringing my total payout to nearly $800,000, but leaving me with a tarnished reputation and bleak job prospects. By 2 a.m., I had signed all the forms, rolled my 401k into an IRA, returned all company materials, and was escorted out. Standing on the sidewalk with an empty satchel, I felt like I might collapse. I rushed to catch a cab back to the hotel, imagining strangers watching me die on the street. In my room, I mixed whiskey with 7-Up and ice, a sacrilege I needed. I sat down to think. At 42, I was too young to retire but unsure if I could start over. I decided I needed courage. I bought a new laptop, installed the necessary software, and began working. I transferred $50,000 from savings and liquidated some investments, preparing to move over $1,200,000 into an offshore trading account called Blue Sky International. By 9 a.m., I ordered a hamburger and beer from room service. My phone had been off for 36 hours. Exhausted, I decided to relax, watch the news, and avoid dealing with everything. Eventually, jet lag caught up with me and I fell asleep. The next morning, I had an early breakfast and turned on my phone. It was flooded with messages. "Help Dad." "Mom is having a breakdown," from Dean and Katie. "What's going on with Jean?" From my dad, birthday wishes from Jean's parents, my kids, and Team Singapore, but nothing from Jean. It felt like I didn't exist. I caught the 8:30 flight to Springfield and arrived home to chaos. The living room was a mess, with games, soda cans, and plates everywhere. The kitchen sink was clogged, and the dishwasher and trash can were overflowing. The laundry room was piled with dirty clothes. I spent 3 hours cleaning and organizing, noticing 2 empty wine bottles with different lipstick marks in the living room. Our bedroom needed fresh sheets and ventilation. The kids' rooms were dirty but slightly better. Finally, I went to my office to check the Southeast Asia aquaculture stock. It had dropped to $9.37, almost 2 points down for the day. Now it was time to see if I had the courage to enter the market. I called my dad. My mom had died 5 years ago from breast cancer. We talked about Jean. He said she seemed sad and depressed recently. She was heartbroken for no clear reason. I checked our bank transactions and home phone messages but found nothing unusual. After folding clothes, I checked for dinner options and found little. I reconnected the battery to my Audi A6, started it, and went to the supermarket for groceries to make Thai green curry and jasmine rice. I boiled rice with water, coconut milk, and ginger for flavor. I stir-fried chicken strips with zucchini, Asian eggplant, lemongrass, garlic, Asian basil, and cilantro. I added coconut milk, green curry paste, lime zest and juice, fish sauce, and a bit of sugar. I garnished the dish with spring onions, coriander, and basil leaves, set the table, and poured a beer. Jean arrived and the kids ran inside, excited to see me. I hugged and kissed them, telling them how much I missed them. Katie cried in my arms, and Dean, more reserved, hugged me too. Jean watched us with a wistful look, then kissed me gently. "Welcome home, Adam," she said without much enthusiasm. "That smells nice. What is it?" "Thai green curry," I replied. Dean and Katie were curious. It smells really good, Dean said, hugging me again. Go clean up for dinner, Jean instructed. Afterward, she hugged and kissed me. You look exhausted, Adam. Why are you back so soon? I got fired, I admitted. She blushed, fumbling for words. We'll figure something out, but what about you? She seemed distant, more like an acquaintance than my wife. Are you okay? It's work, she said, trying to smile. The market's down and there's a lot of pressure at M. She gestured to show the extent of the pressure. The kids returned, and we gathered for dinner. I served the meal, poured wine for Jean and me, and Dean had Mountain Dew while Kathy had water. We ate together for the first time in 4 months. I shared stories about Singapore and team-building activities like dragon boat races and combat archery. After dinner, Dean and Kathy surprised me with a wrapped present. Happy birthday, Dad, they said, bringing tears to Jean's eyes. I kissed my kids as Jean exclaimed, Oh my God, Adam, I'm so sorry, I totally forgot. I resisted reminding her of the gold diamond earrings I got her for her birthday and focused on the kids. I opened my present, a Band of Brothers DVD set. I loved that show and had always wanted the collection. I kissed the kids again, our smiles matching from the joy of giving and receiving. Jean, embarrassed and remorseful, promised to get me a gift the next day. You don't have to, I said. Being home with my family is all I need. Dean and Katie hugged me again, saying, Love you, Daddy. We talked at the table for over an hour, but eventually the kids had to do their homework while Jean and I cleaned up the kitchen. What's going on, Jean? You're not yourself, I asked. She hesitated, then admitted, I don't know, Adam. I'm depressed. You've always traveled so much, and the last time was too long. We hardly lived the same life. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I feel lost. I hugged her, and after some resistance, she let me hold her as she sobbed softly. She was right. My job had kept me away for years. We had agreed to make sacrifices for an early retirement, but it was taking a toll. Jean suggested I spend time with the kids. I helped Katie with her homework, did the same with Dean, then tucked Katie into bed. Dean confided, Mom's not okay, Dad. She's crying and not doing much around the house. I think she's having a nervous breakdown. There were tears in his eyes. Please fix it, Dad. I nodded, though I had no idea what to do. As I went downstairs, I heard Jean on the phone. She ended the call abruptly when she saw me. Who? Was that? I asked. One of the girls from the office, she replied, looking defiant. She seemed angry but wouldn't discuss it. Exhausted, I checked the Singapore Stock Exchange. California was trading at $9.90, a slight increase. I went upstairs, waited for Jean to finish in the bathroom, then got ready for bed. When I reached for her, she tensed but then pressed against me. Please just hold me, she whispered. I held her for a long time, feeling something was fundamentally wrong. Was it the long separation? Had she fallen out of love or in love with someone else? Was she sick? These thoughts swirled until I finally fell asleep. I woke up at 4:30, feeling tired and sick. I went for a run and planned to buy melatonin to reset my body clock. After an hour, I returned to find Jean gone, leaving a note asking me to feed the kids and take them to school. I checked my bank account, saw the money from JP Morgan had cleared, and transferred it to my offshore account. I checked the CA shares, which were now trading at $8.99, slowly declining. I had to choose between fixing my marriage or securing my financial future. Could I do both? I spent time with Dean and Kathy, asking about their activities while I was away. They mentioned spending time with Jean's boss, Anthony Miller, and his daughter, Evelyn, doing things like miniature golf and movies. Dean noticed my concern and defended the time spent with Evelyn, saying they felt like one big happy family. I assured them I was glad they enjoyed themselves and proposed a summer vacation. They were excited, and I hugged and kissed them before driving them to school. Then I called George Tallis, my old mentor, to discuss my situation. George, still a registered broker, agreed to review the CA prospectus I sent him. Later, I stopped by a pharmacy near St. John's Hospital and saw Jean and Evelyn Miller leaving the hospital, looking distraught. They seemed deeply connected in their grief. I wondered if Jean or Evelyn was sick or if they were mourning a mutual acquaintance. The sight left me unsettled, but I proceeded to my meetings. At my first meeting, Julian Knowles said he'd discussed the CA investment with his club. At the second, Aaron Goldstein quickly agreed to invest $10 million after the paperwork. George called, saying he had interested investors, and we agreed on a sliding commission structure. I then called my dad to discuss the CA opportunity, and he decided to invest $100,000. When I explained Jean's behavior, he suggested it resembled someone in mourning. We ruled out her parents and siblings, considering her cousins were distant. Dad then gave me the number of a private investigator they had used for insurance fraud cases. I went home, California'd my contacts in Singapore and Southeast Asia for updates, and recreated the risk assessment profile for CA. The results matched my report: rational numbers, a solid management team, and an early-stage project. Importantly, the management team had invested their own money, strengthening my position. Everything was set for SGX to open, and I would start trading. While waiting, I contacted a private investigator, Clarence Williams, who had a slow Southern accent but a sharp mind. He required a $5,000 advance and would start the next day. I drank coffee, waiting for the time to pass. Dean and Kathy came home late from sports practice, and I spent time with them but explained my important business. Jean arrived, looking tired but more determined. "I bought Chinese food on the way home," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Are you working?" she asked. "Hi, Jean," I replied. No affectionate words came from her, so I didn't respond either. "I have to work tonight from about 7, okay?" I replied. "I have a present for your birthday," she said, handing me a small gift-wrapped package. The card read, "Happy birthday, Adam. Love, Jean." Inside was a bottle of Hugo Boss aftershave. I thanked her and she kissed my dry lips. We ate as a family. Dean and Kathy talked about their day, and Jean mentioned some changes during my absence, like her boss, Anthony Miller, converting his house into a shelter for misused teens. I was surprised, as I thought he was more of a country club type. His wife, Lynn, started it before she died, Jean said. He used to use empty houses he owned, but now wants a permanent establishment. "Why now?" I asked. She became impassive. "Now the opportunity has presented itself," she said, nodding. "That's a great idea." "Springfield could use it," I said, smiling. She smiled back, and we cleaned up together. Despite my pleasant expression, I sensed she was hiding something. After cleanup, I told her I was going to work in my office. With an hour before trading opened in Singapore, I sat at my desk thinking about my marriage and trying to keep my sanity. Jean and I had once been compatible in every way, but the past few years had been difficult due to my frequent traveling. Usually we planned for my return, leading to many honeymoons, but not this time. The situation made me angry. In Singapore and South Asia, many women sought relationships with foreign men for various reasons, and I was hit on daily. However, I turned them down because I was married to a woman I loved. But recent events made me question our relationship. Reflecting on any warning signs, I realized that aside from a breakdown in communication over the past few weeks, there wasn't much. But now, I had to focus on the work at hand. When the Singapore market opened, California was trading at $8.49. With over $30 million to invest, I cautiously began buying stocks. Despite my purchases, the price kept falling as investors tried to offload their shares. I suspected my old company was dumping shares. I kept buying, expecting the price to stabilize, but it plummeted to $5.61. With our $30 million, we bought over 10% of the shares, allowing us to appoint someone to the board of directors. I called George, and we celebrated over whiskey, an 18-year-old JP Weiser for me and a 10-year-old Bully Bourbon for George. Our purchases encouraged other investors to buy at the bargain price, and by the time I logged off, the price had climbed to $8.72, stranding short sellers. It was almost 2 a.m. I quickly cleaned up and went to bed, finally passing out from the melatonin pills. The next morning, I woke up late. Dean and Kathy were finishing breakfast, and Jean was on the phone saying, "Time is of the essence." She ended the call when she saw me. "Working, Jean?" I asked. She shrugged exaggeratedly and poured me a cup of coffee. "You must have been up late." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Did the trade go well?" she asked. I mimicked her shrug, keeping my worries about California to myself. "It's still early. We'll have to wait and see." "Okay." She kissed my cheek. "You look tired. I'll take the kids to school." She left, calling out to Dean and Kathy. They shouted, "Bye and love you, Daddy," as they left. I poured another cup and headed to my office, pleased to see the stock closed at $10.14 after a late rally. It was time to stabilize the stock away from hostile games. I washed my face and started emailing and making calls, first checking the Miller Real Estate website. It promoted its social responsibility program, New Horizon House, helping troubled teens. I found Anthony Miller's Facebook, filled with pictures of cars, vacations, and a recent corporate event photo with Jean holding his hand, looking at him instead of the photographer. It was curious, but not definitive. Jean's Facebook was mostly old family photos with nothing much recent. Evelyn's Facebook showed many pictures with Jean over the years, some with Anthony too, but nothing inappropriate. Her recent posts were cryptic about life and prayers. I called Clarence Williams to expedite the investigation, but he said it would take time. I called my father, who advised against jumping to conclusions and to let the experts handle it. He told me to be patient. I was torn. Should I try to fix my marriage, risking more heartache if I was being played, or do nothing and regret it later? I called a lawyer who advised that fixing the marriage was usually better than divorce. I had one more idea. I contacted a former colleague of Jean's, Chad, who owed me a favor. He agreed to meet for lunch at Red Robin. He walked in, looking every bit the realtor in his golf shirt, chinos, and Dockers. After small talk over burgers, I got down to business. "So, you're fishing for information, Adam?" Chad laughed. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm trying to understand something about Em. Something's been bothering me." Chad turned serious. Everything changed when Tony lost his wife to cancer. He lost his drive for a while, but his daughter took over and he eventually found his footing again. He looked at me shrewdly. "Your wife?" She became very close to him, often referred to as his office wife. I gestured for him to continue, my throat tight. I didn't see anything inappropriate, but office gossip can be cruel. "Tony, Evelyn, and your wife spent a lot of time together, but you weren't home much, were you?" I shrugged. We talked about it without adding anything new. Chad was about to leave when he remembered something. "Did you know Anthony was rumored to have cancer?" We said goodbye, and I called St. John's Hospital, asking for Anthony Miller's room. He was in the oncology ward. I paid for lunch and headed home with a lot to think about. That evening, I went outside with whiskey and a cigar. Jean joined me with a glass of wine. "Can we talk, Adam?" "Shoot. You went on the M website," she accused. "Why does it matter?" "Why did you go to the company's website, and I assume you've checked everyone's Facebook pages too?" She glared at me, daring me to argue. We'd been married long enough for me to recognize the signs. "What did you expect to find?" "Exactly what I found." "And what was that?" "Why are you questioning me, Jean? Social media isn't private." I laughed, and she blushed. "Evelyn said you checked her Instagram." "Really?" "Yeah." She tried to stay calm. "Why are you acting like this?" "How like this?" "Or why?" I blew smoke in her direction, knowing she hated it. She waved it away, spilling wine on her blouse. "Please stop, Adam." She began to cry. Normally I would have hugged her, but not this time. "Why are you crying, Jean?" "You're upsetting me with your behavior, Adam." She grew louder, but I let out more smoke. "Who are you?" I asked. She struggled for words. "I am your wife, Adam Carter." "That's who I am." I stepped back as she gasped and ran into the house. I finished my drink and went to my office. CA's stock was rising to $11.92. George and I agreed it was a trend, not a spike. I monitored the market, noticing CA was the only stock with significant upward movement. A JP Morgan team member admitted they dumped half the stock at 50 cents on the dollar. My former boss, Joe Rutledge, suggested holding the rest as the trend looked positive. We laughed. He hinted that JP Morgan might rehire me and fire Rutledge. That night I slept on the couch in my office. The next morning, I saw California closed at $13. The trend continued, and our investors doubled their money. If it reached $25, we'd see a 300% profit. I made breakfast, drank coffee, and called the kids to eat, ignoring Jean all morning. After dropping them off at school, I went to the gym and then to IHOP for a late breakfast. I made some calls and had a 2-hour meeting with George. When I got home, we discussed starting a combined brokerage with offices in Springfield and Chicago. George would work on the structure and equity while I developed a market plan. I was drafting the plan when Jean came in alone. I left Kathy and Dean at the Beckers for the night. "We need to talk." She poured me a bourbon and herself a glass of wine. We sat in the living room and I waited for her to speak first. "I don't know what you think I've been doing while you've been away, Adam." "I haven't thought about anything yet." "Well, you're being very disrespectful and ugly to me." "Is that how you feel?" I raised an eyebrow. "Disrespectful." She nodded, then apologized. "You're not home anymore. We're like two strangers." "So after 17 years, we're strangers because I've been gone for 4 months?" All the Skypes, texts, and phone calls didn't matter. "There was a lot of pressure on me, and you were far away." She wiped her tears. "But you're my husband, and I'm your wife, and that's all that matters." She stood up and walked away. I sat there, sipping my bourbon, wondering if she had lost her mind. I heard her on the phone, then the murmur of water from the bathtub. Later, she came downstairs wearing a gray dress, black shoes, and a string of pearls I'd bought her. "Go take a shower and get dressed," she said. "I'll make a reservation at Chesapeake Seafood Restaurant." I got ready in 15 minutes, ignoring my suspicion that she was on the phone again. At the restaurant, she had a gin and tonic, and I ordered a Singapore gin sling. We talked about the kids over Chardonnay and appetizers. She seemed unconcerned about me losing my job. "You're one of the smartest people I know, Adam. I believe you'll find a job quickly." She smiled at me. She had no idea our future depended on California. The evening improved as we discussed friends, parents, and everyday topics. When our main courses arrived, I ordered the captain's platter, and she had lobster. She treated me to wine, and we enjoyed each other's company. If she was having an affair, she hid it well. We finished our meal and went home. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Jean was making breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, and English muffins. We ate together, discussing chores around the house. After breakfast, she went to pick up Dean and Kathy. I was in the backyard when my phone rang. It was Clarence Williams. "Can you talk?" he asked, and my heart sank. We arranged to meet at a downtown coffee shop. I left my work, cleaned up, and met him. He waved when he saw me. He was nothing like I expected. Unlike the detectives on TV, he was a small, unassuming man, no more than 5 feet 6 inches, thin, gray-haired, and balding. He wore dark pants, a shirt, and an old sports jacket, and even his shoes looked like they were from Walmart. He probably drove a Toyota. However, his high-end cell phone didn't match his outward appearance, and his firm handshake revealed his true nature. He got straight to the point. "Mr. Carter, we didn't catch your wife at a hotel or in any secret meetings," he said, holding up a hand to stop me from interrupting. "But we have ample evidence she's been having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller, for at least 2 years. It's an open secret in the office. His daughter, Evelyn, knows and facilitates it. Your wife often left the kids with friends to spend weekends with him when you were away." His words hit hard and my pulse quickened. My hands clutched the table as if I were having a heart attack. Hearing the truth from a stranger was devastating. Clarence continued, but I could barely hear him. "Miller has been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer and has only a few months to live." "What?" I asked, trying to process. "He's undergoing therapy, but it's not working. He has metastatic pancreatic cancer." This confirmed what Chad had hinted at. Jean's behavior suddenly made sense. She was mourning the man she loved and trying to cope with his impending passing. I shared my thoughts with Clarence, needing someone to talk to. Clarence's next words confirmed my initial impression of his depth. Cheaters often try to minimize their actions by saying it was just physical, engaging. But that's nonsense, Mr. Carter. They're invested in the relationship. Women need to feel loved. Long-term affairs are about more than physical engagement. They involve sharing experiences, hopes, and dreams. They develop a personal language and justify their actions by finding faults in their spouses. I was devastated. My wife was in a relationship with another man, giving him her full attention and enjoying the good times without the burdens of daily life. He provided her with the excitement missing from our marriage. We talked more and agreed to pause the investigation while I considered my next steps. After he left, I sat and pondered my life. One thing was clear: my marriage was over. The idea of staying together for the children no longer made sense. As difficult as it was to face, I knew that many children in the U.S. live in separated or divorced families, and mine would be no different. I sipped my cooling coffee, feeling real pain inside. Jean and Miller would pay for this. I tried to muffle my emotions. Anger, hurt, and anguish wouldn't help. I thought back to my work in the Far East, where old-style executives viewed business and life in multi-generational terms, much like Southern Europeans. When two families went to war, there was no reprieve until one was wiped out. But I wasn't a triad leader or mafia boss, just an ordinary man living an ordinary life. I had no superpowers or omnipotent allies. I asked for more coffee and pondered how to get revenge on a dying man. As for Jean, it was simple: take everything she valued. First, I had to deal with Miller. He wasn't married to me, but he disrespected my marriage and family. My anger flared up again. At work, psychological evaluations revealed 2 traits. I was risk-averse and stubborn to the point of intransigence. These traits drove me now. I would retaliate regardless of the consequences, and not back down until one side was defeated, even if it was me. An embryo of a plan began to form. I called Clarence and asked him to find troubled women the Millers had helped. It was another fishing trip, but I was aiming big. In 2014, during a trip to Kenya, I joined a local team for deep-sea fishing in the Indian Ocean. I learned that to catch a marlin, you first catch small fish like bonito, use them as live bait, and then catch the marlin. That lesson gave me a plan. I drove home, did breathing exercises to calm down, and pretended I was in the same mood as before. Jean wasn't home, so I finished my tasks. Later, she returned with Dean and Kathy, and we grilled steaks and corn on the cob, made coleslaw, and warmed baguettes. I spent the day as a loving father and husband, but inside, I was a cynical fool. Cynical Adam decided Jean was doing damage control because her lover was dying. I was her backup plan. My time with Dean and Kathy was real, but my time with Jean was like a B-movie. Cynical Adam reminded me to keep this in mind during the divorce and when looking for new relationships. The next few days were strange, living a lie and watching myself play a role. On a positive note, George and I sorted out the new trading organization, registered it in Singapore, and transferred the CA portfolio. California was now trading at $16.33. I became paranoid. I added security measures requiring a fingerprint and password, encrypted all my files and emails, and always turned off my laptop. I deleted all emails not from George without opening them, uploaded needed files to the cloud, reformatted my phone, and re-uploaded necessary data. I researched other interesting stocks and contacted potential investors from JP Morgan, confident that the layoff nullified my non-compete clause. On Thursday, Clarence delivered the ammunition I was waiting for, a flash drive containing information on 14 women the Millers had helped. The handover happened at a different coffee shop due to my heightened paranoia. The flash drive included brief bios and old photos. 5 women still lived locally. 1, Leah, worked as an escort. I bought a cell phone, called her, and arranged to meet at a motel. Leah arrived on time, small, thin, and tattooed. "Show me the money," she said. I placed $200 on the bed and asked, "How do you feel about making a statement?" She initially refused. But when I clarified that I wanted information, she agreed to talk. Leah recounted her story. She left home after school, ended up on the streets, and began selling herself for food and lodging. After a traumatic incident, she was taken to the hospital and then to Mrs. Miller's house, where she stayed for 6 months before leaving due to boredom with the rules. I asked if she experienced bullying at the house. She hesitated, then asked how much. I offered $5,000. She negotiated skillfully, asking for $20,000 to help her and her daughter start anew. I promised her a job in Chicago if everything worked out. And her eyes lit up. "For real?" she asked, both hopeful and scared. I reassured her and we agreed on a plan. We exchanged numbers, with her saving mine under the name Jerry. Phase 1 was complete. At home, I maintained my facade and Jean seemed to buy it. She was too focused on the Miller Legacy project to notice much else. I gathered as much information as I could without raising suspicion. We cooked and ate together like old times. During breakfast, she mentioned she'd be busy with New Horizons House and that the grand opening was on Monday at 10. I already knew from the company website and social media. I feigned interest and subtly questioned her, learning the mayor and local media would attend. "Did they stop the chemo and radiation so Tony could feel well enough to attend?" she asked someone, probably Evelyn. She then sobbed slightly. "It's going to be a life-changing moment," she said. "Not if I can help it," I thought. My divorce papers were ready, awaiting permission to file. Illinois was a no-fault state, so it was a matter of irreconcilable differences. I started the day checking the SGX. Our stock had reached its issue price and was rising, a good start to Friday. I listened to WMA radio at 9:30, where Evelyn discussed the New Horizons House, praising its social responsibility and calling for community participation and donations. Then a hesitant caller broke the smooth narrative. Through sobs, she revealed, "Please don't believe the house helped anyone. It allowed Mr. Miller to misuse women." Evelyn denied it vehemently, defending her father. The caller continued, "He did, and more than once. I'm a strumpet now, thanks to your precious daddy. My name is Leah, and your father ruined me." The connection cut off, and the station went to a commercial break. When they returned, the host was torn between continuing the original interview and addressing the shocking revelation. Evelyn tried to explain it away, but the lines were ringing with listeners' reactions. Some defended Leah, while others dismissed her as trying to make a buck. Another caller, Rita, said, "Anthony Miller misused me too," adding more fuel to the fire. A married woman with children called in, sobbing that Miller had stressed her too and forced her to do things she couldn't refuse. She disconnected, leaving a long silence before the host, who sounded like he was crying, could speak. The public reaction was a mix of outrage and defense, turning a low-interest story into an emotional storm. I called Vicky, an old high school friend who works at the local newspaper and anchors the news for 2 regional radio stations. I asked if she had heard about what was happening on WMA and WTX. She had. I told her I was concerned because my wife works for MRE in the New Horizon Home project. She wasn't sure but said she would look into it, noting that if true, it would be the biggest misuse case in Springfield in 2 generations. By lunchtime, the story had quieted on the air, but social media and Twitter went wild. Initially, opinions were split evenly, but soon it became a fierce witch hunt against Miller. Thousands of women shared their misuse stories. Some were detailed, others just Me Too, and some were graphic. The information went viral globally. I passed out with a massive headache, took Tylenol, and feeling dirty, took a shower where I broke down, crying harder than I had since my mom died. I realized I had unleashed a firestorm that was now out of control. Nietzsche's saying about becoming a monster by fighting monsters felt apt. All I could do now was hang on and pray. I picked up Dean and Kathy, made chicken stir-fry, and waited for Jean. She didn't come home, and her phone was off. We ate and played a board game. Jean finally came home around 10, looking devastated. "You heard?" She sighed. "Have you heard all the nasty things they say about Tony?" She collapsed into a chair. I handed her a brandy. "Yeah, sounds like your boss is a carnivore," I said evenly. "Where there's smoke, there's fire." "No, Adam, he's a good man. He would never do anything like this." Time to get to phase 2. "Jean," she looked up, "you don't know the man very well." "You don't know me," I pressed on. "You and I have no secrets. We're husband and wife, so you know what I'm capable of, just like I know you." I held her gaze. "You may know Miller as your boss, but who knows what he's really like?" Conflicting thoughts played across her face. "No, he's a good man. He would never do that. I would know." "How do you know, Jean? He's your boss, your co-worker. He could be hiding a million secrets. I always felt like he was hiding something. He's the kind of guy you wouldn't leave alone with your wife or daughters." She sighed and hesitated. "Has he ever tried anything with you?" She turned white, and I pretended not to notice. "No, never. How can you even ask that?" She tried to be snarky but ended up looking dumbfounded. "Because you're a pretty woman, Jean. If what they say about him is true, he must be very immoral." She burst into tears, staring into her glass of brandy for answers she didn't find. She finished it and went upstairs, tiredly saying goodnight to Dean and Kathy. I heard the shower running. I finished my cognac and headed to bed, pretending to be half asleep when she returned. She was talking to someone, probably Evelyn, mentioning nightmares several times. She questioned why there weren't more women speaking out, and acknowledged it wouldn't go away easily. She was right. She made a second call. "Hi, Tony," she said. I overheard snippets where she reassured him it was all a misunderstanding and would be resolved. I barely heard her move to the kitchen, but I caught her last words, "I love you too." I heard the microwave beep, and she probably snacked alone before bed. By the time she joined me, I was asleep. Saturday, I woke up first, made breakfast, and drove Dean and Kathy to sports practice. At home, I spoke to Vicky, who told me 4 women had come forward. Her sources said the mayor's office considered the project toxic and was distancing itself, as were civic associations. By mid-morning, the Attorney General announced a full investigation. I talked to George about business and my father about my marriage. He agreed it was irretrievably broken, but said Dean and Kathy would cope like many kids in the U.S. I called Jean. "Where are you?" "Evelyn, the company lawyers, and I are fighting these lawsuits." "Are you sure you should be involved?" I asked with concern. "The fallout could be significant." She resisted as expected. That weekend, M had less than 20% of its usual attendance at the show. By Monday, the phones were ringing with canceled orders, and the New Horizon opening was postponed. Monday, another woman came forward. She was married to a wealthy businessman and well-known in the community. She claimed Miller misused her twice during her 8-day stay at the house. She left her lawyer's details for a class action lawsuit. By the end of the week, 5 things had happened. First, Miller was interviewed by the district attorney at the hospital, after which his condition worsened. Second, 3 of the 5 women testified to the police about assaults occurring about 5 years ago. Third, the media storm forced M to close its doors. Fourth, California stock passed $24, and I began selling shares, making back our original investment while retaining 2/3 of the stock. Fifth, my dad took Dean and Kathy out for the weekend. I bought a bottle of 2012 vintage Veuve Clicquot to celebrate with Jean. When I arrived home, I saw an M-branded BMW X5 parked next to Jean's Lexus. Inside, Jean was crying, and Evelyn was comforting her. "Ladies," I greeted them, grabbed 3 champagne flutes and popped the cork. I filled the glasses and handed them out. They stared at me in shock. "Salute," I toasted, drank half and burped. Then the shouting began. "Jean, you're divorcing me. I thought we were a family." Divorce papers lay open on the coffee table. "Evelyn, how could you, Adam? Don't you care about your wife? Don't you love her? Have a drink, Jean, celebrating the end of an era." I finished my champagne and reached for the bottle. "Evelyn, first of all, I could, and I did. Second, I stopped caring and loving her when she became your father's strumpet." I knocked over my glass and toasted Evelyn. "Let's drink to your father's legacy. I hope he lives long enough to stand trial so the world knows what a piece of crap he really is." She turned white and collapsed. I turned to Jean. Get yourself a lawyer. The kids will stay with my father until custody is established. Her eyes widened with fear, seeing a side of me she never had before. Evelyn dropped her flute, spilling champagne. They looked at me like I was a madman with a trigger. Care for champagne? I asked. No, you left me alone so long I needed human contact, Jean tried to justify but couldn't meet my gaze. I understand, I laughed humorlessly. And how do you manage that now? Evelyn attacked me again. How many women did you sleep with while you were away? Men always want their women to be angels while they do whatever they want. Don't think all men act like your father. Just because he ruined young women and marriages doesn't mean the rest of us stoop to his level. I stared at her, hoping she'd object. I leaned closer. Your father is a malfeasant, a criminal, a pig. He'll likely die before going to prison, but his reputation will be destroyed. His legacy project will never succeed. His money will be tied up in lawsuits. M will go bankrupt, and you'll have to change your name and move far away. She trembled and cried. I wished she was a man so I could unleash my rage. Evelyn, you probably helped lure these girls, like Ghislaine Maxwell did for Jeffrey Epstein. Her mouth opened in horror. No, it's all a lie. My father is a good man. I turned to Jean. You have 2 hours to pack and leave. If you're still here when I return, I'll call the press and invite them to interview you about your involvement. Screw you, she spat. I'll move out, but I'll hire a lawyer first thing, and then we'll see who gets what. 2 hours, I repeated. I drove off, but a few blocks away, the adrenaline caught up with me, and I had to pull over, gasping and shaking. After 15 minutes, I regained control and called my father. I told him about Jean's departure and asked him to keep Dean and Kathy with him. Jean could visit, but not be alone with them. We talked, and then I drove around aimlessly before getting gas and heading home. It was 10 by the time I returned. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of happier times. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't sleep. Socrates said that an unexamined life isn't worth living, but I avoided examining my psyche too deeply. I knew things had gone too far and couldn't be stopped. I feared what might happen if the situation went to court and decided to get Leah out of town to eliminate my direct connection. The next morning, I felt as tired as when I went to bed. After my morning routine, I had breakfast downtown and called the kids. They were fine, though Dean suspected something was wrong. Over coffee, I reached Leah. Did I deliver as promised? She asked. I confirmed she had. We arranged her flight to Chicago the next day. I had transferred $25,000 from my offshore account to one of George's, then to her new bank account. Leah was off to a job as a property management assistant set up by one of George's contacts. I was on my second cup of coffee when Vicky called. 3 women have sued Miller seeking damages. The papers will be served on Monday. We talked for a while. She and the news editors were surprised by the timing and the way the story had unfolded, but given the current climate, it wasn't shocking. Once Leah, who claimed she was a courtesan, got publicity, others followed, similar to the Harvey Weinstein case. I spent the rest of Saturday with Dean and Kathy. I told them their mom and I were divorcing because she was having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller. Kathy didn't understand, but Dean did. She slept with Mr. Miller, Dad? I nodded sadly. Yeah, they've been together for a while now. Kathy cried while Dean remained unfazed. We went to the golf course with my dad and hit a few buckets of balls. Dean and Kathy used my old clubs and had a good natural swing. We had dinner at a Greek restaurant and then headed to bed. I returned to my quiet, lonely house and had another sleepless night. On Sunday, her parents called, hoping for reconciliation for the sake of the children. How can I reconcile with a woman who's been having an affair for years, I asked, especially with a maniac like Miller? They sighed, and I assured them it would be figured out in court. They were left with a shattered view of their daughter. Life went on slowly and painfully. Dean and Kathy moved back in with me, and my father moved in to help. My business gained momentum as George and I received positive feedback. Vicky informed me that a 4th woman had joined the lawsuit against Miller, but not Leah, which I found odd. I had a meeting with Jean's lawyers about property division. I'd set up investment accounts for Dean and Kathy's education out of our combined assets, so they couldn't be touched. My last paycheck and payments from JP Morgan went to my offshore account. Her lawyer suspected a golden handshake, but had no idea how much. It was only a matter of time before they subpoenaed the HR documents. I offered Jean nothing, as she had a good job. She argued there should be at least $250,000 in cash and near-cash assets. I assured them it was lost on unprofitable stocks. Jean called it crap, but I laughed. Take the deal, Jean, or I'll fight until you run out of money for lawyers. I'll expletive you financially. Why are you being such an idiot, she asked. I deserve half of whatever is left of our marriage. Go to your second husband and ask him for money. You had more of a marriage with him than with me. But hurry, he may not have any money left after those women get what they deserve. It dragged on for months. Jean's stance wavered from meeting to meeting. She claimed I made her relationship with Miller look more serious than it was, then blamed me for her behavior, then wanted to reconcile, and finally threatened to take me to the cleaners. Her lawyer said he'd get her back in the house immediately. I gave her my biggest grin. Be careful, Jean, or I'll expose your complicity in this. She turned pale. Try it and see what happens next. As I left the lawyer's office, I noticed Evelyn glaring at me. I smiled at her like one smiles at the walking dead. Her smile faltered. You should have stayed out of this, Evelyn. You reap what you sow. 2 days later, Leah was $5,000 richer, and the local newspapers, Twitter, and social media were ablaze with revelations about Evelyn Miller helping her disgraced father, Anthony Miller. The DA's office faced criticism for not arresting Miller or taking action against his daughter. In a media briefing, the DA's office said the investigation was still in its early stages, but the press didn't hold back. And another storm erupted. The public, still reeling from the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein scandal, quickly targeted Evelyn. Miller was sued by 4 women, making me increasingly anxious and sleepless. Going to court was a huge risk and could derail everything. 6 weeks after my return from Singapore, the doorbell rang. It was Evelyn. What do you need? I asked bluntly. Can we talk, Adam? No, I don't want to be associated with a malfeasant like you. I closed the door, but she rang again, begging to talk. Where's your entitlement now? I thought, but said, I don't think so. You just want to record me. Or I promise I won't. Good. Her eyes lit up, but I stopped her. Put your purse and phone in the car first. I set my phone to record. Okay, talk. She looked unsure whether to stand or sit, but eventually sat on the edge of the couch. I know it's you, Adam. You created this nightmare. I stared at her without emotion. Stop it, Adam. I remained silent, and she changed the subject. Your claims about my father are lies. They need to be disproved. I laughed. There's nothing I can do. It's up to the court now. Please, Adam, I know you can stop this. Now that your world has collapsed, you want my help. Where were you when your father was with my wife? Her face reddened. Oh yes, you were helping, making sure she agreed to be your father's strumpet. We stared in silence. Finally, she asked, when will you be satisfied? Not until your family is completely destroyed, Evelyn. She shuddered. There will be no stopping, no ceasefire, no peace. I spoke slowly, making sure she understood this wasn't a game. She realized the truth and fell silent, then surprised me by asking, You want revenge on me? How? She clasped her hands together, unable to meet my eyes. Staggering, she left and ran to her BMW. I watched her drive away, feeling both satisfaction and disgust at my cruelty. Though it was early, I wanted a drink. I spent the rest of the week in and out of law offices while working on new clients. George and I were completing due diligence on promising listings on the Hong Kong and Johannesburg stock exchanges. The 4 women's class action lawsuit against Miller was in full swing. The Millers, led by Evelyn and her attorneys, were trying to settle out of court. The DA struggled with prosecuting a man on his deathbed, so we waited. The Millers had been nearly cleaned out, and the women received over $2 million each. This effectively marked the end of M. I needed one more thing to complete my revenge. So I went to the hospital and entered Miller's room, looking official and walking as if I belonged there. No one stopped me. I wanted him to know who had ruined him and his legacy. He lived for 2 more days. Evelyn had him cremated, and only 5 people attended the small gathering, including Jean. She wanted to take Dean and Kathy with her. I told her, I would see you dead first. You would, wouldn't you? She replied with a mix of fear and hatred, similar to Evelyn's last look. You ruined him, didn't you? All because he and I had a relationship. You went crazy and ruined so many lives. She cried. I laughed harshly. You planted the seeds, Jean. Why didn't you just tell me you wanted someone else? We could have divorced, but you chose to neglect me. She admitted quietly, I loved Tony. He gave me what I needed. With you, I felt like your job came first. Then when we had Dean and Kathy, I felt even more neglected. I could have walked away, but I didn't. I played a recording on my phone. Was it worth it? I asked. No, Miller wheezed. You ruined everything I worked for. It's your own fault, Miller. I screwed you up big time. How did you find out about me misusing them? He asked. I started laughing uncontrollably. I didn't know, Miller. I thought I was making it up, but now I see why those women pursued you. It all burst open with one little crack. Screw you, Carter, he panted. Those women owed me. He tried to sit up. Jean collapsed to the floor in shock. I walked away, leaving her behind. When MRE sold assets to free up cash, I bought the house they were converting into New Horizon House for next to nothing. I announced I would turn it into a full-fledged shelter for misused women, renamed it Joy Carter House after my mother, and placed it in trust with my dad and the 4 women who sued Miller as trustees. They contributed to the project, and the media praised us. During the divorce, Jean got primary custody, and I paid alimony until Dean and Kathy turned 18. She could stay in the house, but had to contribute 50% toward the mortgage. Alimony for her was 0. When she accused me of hiding money, I threatened her, and she backed down. She became very cautious around me. We eventually divorced. I bought a 3-bedroom condo so the kids could stay with me. I had them almost every weekend since Jean was busy selling houses. I missed them when I traveled regularly to the Far East, but overall, life wasn't too bad. I laughed at myself. Things were tough, but manageable. Jean's relationship with Evelyn ended immediately after I showed her the tape of my confrontation with Miller. I also circulated an edited version of the tape with her father's confession. This took on a life of its own. Evelyn left a couple of months later, and I never heard from her again. I met Leah in Chicago, whose real name was Leanne Roxton. She had cleaned up and was enjoying her work. "Did you know?" I asked. "It was like an open secret," she said. No one admitted to the misuse directly. Everyone was afraid being kicked out on the street would be worse. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She laughed. "I had no idea. I wasn't misused. I contacted a few women, offered them $5,000 to say they were misused." She glared at me, daring me to object, but I didn't. Rita French, the second woman I contacted, fell apart on the phone. She was the first to call the radio station when Miller's daughter was on air. The Me Too campaign started organically from there. "You could have made so much money," I sympathized. She shook her head. "By the time they sued Miller, I was in Chicago and out of the loop. But you gave me a good start, Adam. Thank you." My revenge was complete, and my actions felt justified. The Millers were destroyed. Like in a fictional saga, I learned lessons in revenge and executed them in ways I never imagined. Financially, things were improving. The business was growing, and George talked about me buying him out for his retirement. Dean and Kathy adjusted well, focusing on school, friends, and sports. Life went on. About 4 years after the divorce, Jean began dating an older man. They eventually married. Dean and Kathy said he was a nice guy. I remained single and wasn't seriously dating anyone, likely due to lingering trust issues. At my father's insistence, I started seeing a trauma counselor and began improving my life, but I still had a long way to go. I exposed my wife's cheating with video evidence, and now our kids want nothing to do with her. In emergencies, you have to act fast. When someone has cardiac arrest, you perform chest compressions to keep their brain oxygenated until help arrives to defibrillate their heart and restore its rhythm. You stop the bleeding before worrying about a broken bone. I sat on the patio, clueless about what to do first. This was a new situation for me, and I felt blindsided. As a critical care nurse, I honed my observation skills. I could spot subtle signs of a patient's decline and act swiftly, often saving lives. Yet, I missed the warning signs of my nearly 18-year marriage's demise. I had no intention of saving it. I wanted to end it painfully. After reconsidering, I didn't want innocent parties hurt when I targeted my cheating wife and her lover. I took a sip of beer and thought about my options. Looking around my backyard, the lawn stretched from the patio to the bayou with only a few trees. My house, a traditional-style home with modern amenities, was a gift from my father and grandfather when I got engaged. The land had been in my family for generations, and the house was built by my family's construction company. I chose nursing over joining the business, despite my father's initial disappointment. I could afford some luxuries like a boat and fishing gear, and took my family on vacations when I could. Family was my priority, and now their happiness was at risk. Looking around, I saw my sister's identical house next door. I called her over. We needed to talk. "Isn't it early for a drink, Rob? It's only 2 p.m., she said, noticing my beer. "I'm off for the weekend, in the mood," I replied. She knew my work schedule allowed for frequent time off. I preferred having a cooler of beer nearby to avoid trips to the fridge. Offering her a drink, she sat down. "So what's so urgent?" Susan asked. "You told me not to call anyone before talking to you." "I found out Bonnie is cheating on me," I said, my voice shaking. "Are you sure?" "Maybe it's a cruel joke," she asked. I nodded. There was a video attached, no doubt who sent it. "I don't know," I replied. The email said, "You should know your wife is cheating. Here's proof." The sender was pissed off. 999. Susan was furious. "That cheating cow. Doesn't she know you'll destroy her and her lover? Do you know who the guy is?" I nodded, ready to respond, but she cut me off. "If Rich ever cheated on me, I'd destroy him." How does Bonnie even find time to have an affair? She's home almost every night, except for bachelorette parties where I'm always present. She works with Rich and they usually drive together. He would notice if she was having fun. Susan paused, noticing my shocked expression. No way, she exclaimed. She's cheating with my husband. They're cheating on us with each other. Her face turned red and tears welled up. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you gently, I said, hugging her. I've had a couple of hours to calm down, enough not to grab a weapon. She cried briefly, then composed herself. You okay? What do we do? Wait for them and then confront them, she asked. I love him, but I'm not tolerating this. We need to be smart, I said. Act normal tonight, just like yesterday. We'll greet them with a kiss. Susan frowned. Are you serious? We need a plan. We'll get legal advice tomorrow. At least we know we haven't contracted any STDs, I added with a smirk to lighten the mood. Susan pointed at me. Hell no, I didn't even consider that. You know me, I might joke about becoming a TV star, but I'd never actually do it. She finished her beer and tossed the can. I handed her another and, just for the record, I'm not doing anything with Rich. I just got my period. She laughed. This will last until we confront those cheaters. He's not getting anything from me. Bonnie can have him, and we mustn't let the kids know yet, I warned. They left for Mom and Dad's place this morning. They took their time, but didn't argue or ask questions. They just got in Jason's car and drove off. The kids, my son Jason 17, Rob 16, Dave and Cindy 16, and my daughter Deary 16, spent the entire summer together. They were more like siblings than cousins, especially during the pandemic when they were always together. Rich had been a good father and uncle, involved in the kids' education and activities. I handled the outdoor fun, teaching them camping, fishing, and hunting. We'd camp in the backyard, then gradually venture deeper into the swamp as the kids grew. They'd join in fishing trips, often with Rich or Susan driving the second boat. Recently, Rich let his sons handle his boat while he stayed home. The kids learned to be self-reliant, finding their own food on trips and working together as a team. They were tough and valued family and teamwork. 3 weeks ago, I rearranged my work schedule to get 6 days off in a row. I took the girls in one boat, and the boys went in another. We traveled slowly to avoid snags in shallow water, stopping occasionally so everyone could take turns driving. We spent a week at the old Pooh fish camp, fishing and catching crabs. We bonded as a family, or so I thought. Apparently, Bonnie and Rich didn't value family unity. The thought of telling the kids about Bonnie and Rich's affair was heartbreaking. Family was everything to me, and destroying that unity would be unforgivable. I expressed this to Susan. We can't hide it from them, she said, but we can delay it a bit. I'll make sure they don't know anything is wrong. What do we do next? I can't forgive or forget infidelity, no matter what Bonnie says, I replied. Susan agreed. I can tolerate a lot, but not cheating. I need to figure out how to get rid of her without losing everything. I won't risk jail or let her take the kids. I can't hurt Rich either. I have to be there for the kids. I opened another beer. I get it. We need to break him. Financially. I'm going to take every penny I can get. Child support, alimony, everything. I agreed. Rich earned more, so Susan had a better chance. Bonnie could drive me to the pen, as courts often favor women in divorce cases. In my job, I handle trusts and wills. But I know enough about the law to say our assets are protected. Our houses are safe. Dad gave them to us before we married, so Bonnie and Rich can't claim them. Bonnie might try to stay in your house until the kids are grown, but she can't claim it. Didn't you and Bonnie sign a prenup? Dad insisted. It said if either party cheated, they'd only get 20% of joint assets and no alimony. Bonnie's father, a wealthy plastic surgeon, had insisted on the prenup. He wasn't thrilled when I got his daughter pregnant, fearing I'd take half his fortune. My father also made Susan and Rich sign a similar agreement. I'm worried about that video of Rich and Bonnie, Susan said. Who filmed it and how? There were at least 3 cameras, I said. The video I got showed the same event from different angles, suggesting it wasn't edited. Yet neither Rich nor Bonnie seemed to know they were being recorded. Susan insisted I show her the video on my tablet. Holy crap, she exclaimed. Rich and Bonnie's comments in the video about how Susan and I were clueless infuriated her. Rich is done, but we need to find out who made the video. I don't want it coming back to haunt us. I don't care if the world sees it, as long as it doesn't affect us. I agreed, suggesting we hold off on a public reaction. Susan sat silently, pondering our next steps, then began to sob. I hugged her, and we both cried, unable to hide our pain anymore. That night, I met Bonnie at the door, hugging and kissing her. I half expected her to pull away, but she kissed me back. I couldn't detect any trace of aftershave, just her perfume. Despite my anger, I told her dinner was ready. Susan and I had already planned takeout, neither of us wanting to cook. We joked about poisoning our spouses, but it was a way to vent, not a real option. The next morning, I watched Bonnie get into Rich's car. I called Susan. How'd it go? No problem, she replied. Joking and planning helped me keep my cool. Any idea where they're going tonight? Susan, always a bit of a loose cannon, needed to vent. We had to be honest about our feelings. At 10 a.m., we were in the office of one of Susan's bosses, Jake, a divorce attorney and an old friend. He agreed to represent us. Are you sure you have a video showing both parties? He asked. We assured him we did, but chose not to show it yet. As long as you have evidence of infidelity, you're good. Your prenuptial agreements are strict. Rob, did you consult a lawyer before signing?
I explained that my father insisted on a legal opinion,
and Susan used the same document. Jake continued, the cheater only gets 20% of joint assets, including savings and investments. There are no provisions for personal income, accounts. Do either of you have any hidden income? We shook our heads. What if Bonnie has money she didn't tell me about? I asked. Common property, Jake replied. Like if you bought something without telling her. Home improvements can be tricky. Your homes are protected because they were gifted before marriage, but things like solar panels might be considered common property. So she only gets 20% because she's a cheater, right? I asked. I'm willing to give her that. We can negotiate the division of furniture and other items. She'll have to pay for transportation and storage if she wants to take anything. Jake grinned. These are the games we'll play. The important thing is your ironclad prenups. As long as you prove infidelity, keep the video copies hidden and confidential. If they sue over the video being public, it depends on how it was obtained. Be careful. He emphasized the need for discretion. Susan and I nodded. We had considered editing the video and sharing it with our friends and family, but we were worried about the impact on our children. Now we were more determined to find out who filmed it. We decided to serve the divorce papers on Thursday at noon, but I suggested waiting until Friday afternoon so they would have to worry all weekend without legal advice. Jake convinced us to stick with Thursday, saying it would save costs and still keep them busy with financial statements all weekend, likely increasing their legal fees. Initially, we wanted to serve them in person to watch their reactions, but Jake advised against it. Instead, we decided to serve them at work in front of their colleagues. After leaving Jake's office, we went to the bank to transfer money into new accounts in our names only, ensuring we had statements for all accounts. We paid off and canceled credit cards, opening new ones in our names only. I checked my email and found 3 more videos of Bonnie and Rich. I thanked the sender and asked how they got the videos, expressing concern about them going public. Public. I secretly wished they would be released, but knew we had to be cautious to avoid a lawsuit. An hour later, I received an email with an address, 9203 Victoria Street, apartment 2011. I visited the address and convinced the woman at the counter to give me information by implying the tenant was involved in criminal activities. She gave me the details. The apartment was rented by the insurance company where Rich and Bonnie worked, with Rich's signature on the contract. I wondered how the company would react if they found out they were paying for Rich's affair. Bonnie called me at 12:30, furious about the divorce papers. I calmly told her I knew she had found someone else and was setting her free. We had rehearsed our responses. Bonnie angrily denied the affair, accusing me of believing rumors and threatening to take everything in the divorce, including custody of the kids, child support, and half of our assets. She suggested Rich could move in with her, and I could live with Susan. Imagining what they were doing in my house. Go ahead, I said. Get yourself a lawyer. I barely kept my voice steady, struggling with the regret of my marriage falling apart and anger at her stubborn denial. I hope Susan hadn't revealed too much to Rich. By the way, the girls are packing your things. Susan told the boys to pack Rich's. Everything will be in front of the house for you to pick up this afternoon. We got a restraining order and changed the locks this morning. You'll have to find another place to stay until the court decides. Bonnie started yelling, so I hung up. 10 minutes later, Susan texted, "Backyard, bring your cooler, make sure it's full." "That fool, Rich," she began, sipping her beer. He tried to blame it on some secretary's gossip. I told him Bonnie did the same. He denied everything, said we shouldn't believe it. I told him to get his stuff. Really? Yes. I told him to call first because I had a loaded weapon. Jake will be here soon with 2 sheriff's deputies to keep things from getting out of hand. I realized having deputies present was smart. Rich might provoke me and I could end up in jail for assault. I was already in a controlled panic mode like during emergencies. Susan continued, "I'm glad you talked to the kids earlier. I couldn't have done it without breaking down." We gathered the kids and I told them what was happening. Surprisingly, they seemed to expect it and started packing Bonnie and Rich's stuff. Susan said, "The kids took it surprisingly well. Maybe they're in shock or don't realize how it will affect them." My phone beeped with an email. "I wonder if it's from Pissed Off 999, I said. "Check it," Susan insisted. She showed me how to open it, and we listened to an audio file. "Can you believe Robert and Susan served us?" Bonnie said. "Or they must have found out somehow." "I can't believe this. Just last night, Robert was so affectionate," Rich replied. "Relax," Rich replied. "They don't know anything. Someone must have gossiped about us having lunch or driving together. We need to deny everything. If they go through with this divorce, we'll make them pay. I know a lawyer who will help us. Just don't admit anything. Act like everything you say is being recorded." After listening, Susan and I were silent. "Okay, let them think we don't know anything," I said. "Rich mentioned they've been planning something for a long time. We need to ensure we're protected if they do something illegal." Susan nodded, tears in her eyes. "We have to hold firm." "I know," Susan said quietly. "Jake said I'm in a better position. Courts favor women, but I can't accept Bonnie getting custody of Jason and Deary and living in your house until Deary turns 18, even with the prenup. It's terrible if she lives rent-free while you pay child support." I felt the same but hugged Susan as she cried. I assured her we would come out victorious, though I wasn't sure. Divorce is about minimizing losses. The children were silent as Susan and I entered the house. Deary, Dre, and Cindy were packing Bonnie's clothes into suitcases and bags, now using plastic garbage bags. I asked them to take pictures of the luggage, planning to apply its value to Bonnie's share of the assets. Next door, the boys were almost done. Rich had fewer clothes, and the boys were stuffing them into bags rather than folding them. I smiled as Rob stuffed a $2,000 suit into a bag. They had my back. Bonnie texted me, and I called Jake, who showed up with 2 sheriff's deputies. Jake told me to relax and enjoy. Bonnie and Rich arrived with another familiar face, Boudreaux Landry, a bully from elementary school. "Hey, Robert," Boudreaux smirked. "I hear you're having trouble with your wife and son-in-law. No big deal. If I had a weapon, I would have shot him." Boudreaux was huge, and fighting him wasn't an option. "Hey, Boudreaux," I said. "We're just trying to work it out." "You don't seriously think my boy Rich is with your wife, do you?" Boudreaux asked, grinning. "That's the story," I said. Jake moved closer. "I can't deal with it." Bonnie accused me of taking all the money from our bank account. "Yes, and I have statements showing the original amounts. You'll get what you're owed." She didn't know her credit card would no longer work. Susan and I didn't accompany Rich and Bonnie into the house. Deary, Dre, and Cindy followed Bonnie and a deputy, ensuring nothing funny happened. Jason and Rob followed Rich. "Where's my jewelry?" Bonnie asked. This was a major point of contention over the years. I bought her high-quality jewelry worth at least $25,000. Most of it was locked in my safe. I took pictures of Bonnie's ring and necklace for insurance purposes. I wanted proof of ownership. Boudreaux started to argue but stopped when I explained I took pictures to prevent the jewelry from going missing. Jake stepped in, suggesting a new appraisal of all assets. After consulting with Boudreaux, Bonnie calmly removed her jewelry and handed it to me. "Where am I supposed to go?" Bonnie asked. I nearly suggested her love nest on Victoria Street but held back. I shrugged, realizing my emotions had shifted. Days ago, I loved this woman. Now I felt nothing but anger and coldness toward her. Bonnie and Rich finally left with Boudreaux following. I wondered if they were heading to the apartment. Jake smiled. "I hope so. We have someone following them. If we reveal the apartment now, it will help our negotiations." Instead, they went to the Holiday Inn near their office. Cheerfully, I helped them move their things inside. I needed more flash drives for backups of the audio and video files. Susan and the girls were making dinner when my phone beeped with another email. Susan followed me to the computer. "Okay, guys," Bud's voice said. "Someone's probably following Robert. Stay at a motel and get a room with 2 beds. Make sure both beds look used. The investigator can bribe the maid to check. We'll say, 'You're sharing a room to save money.'" "It was embarrassing when my card was declined," Rich said. "Good thing I took extra cash. What's next?" "I'll call the credit card company to open a new account." "Robert's thought about jewelry," Boudreaux continued. "He likely has a list. Protect any hidden assets legally. They're community property, but what Robert and Susan don't know about, they can't claim. Don't hide too much. You might get caught. If you have a secret bank account, make sure it holds only a small amount. Offshore accounts are better. You don't want to be caught lying under oath." "Now what?" Bonnie asked. "They can find our Baton Rouge accounts." "Screw that," Rich exclaimed. "We'll fly to the Cayman Islands and open an account there. Make the room look used. Wet the tissues, ruffle the towels, wet the shower, and use some shampoo. I'll call the office and say we're off tomorrow." The audio file ended. "Do they have secret bank accounts, Susan?" I asked. "Where did the money come from?" "I see the bank statements. He couldn't have hidden much." I felt bad too. Bonnie and I got $50 weekly for travel cash, and we both reviewed the credit card statements monthly. I told the apartment woman Rich was into pills and Corsican as a bluff, but now I wondered, could he be hiding something? We decided to leave it for tonight, joining the kids for dinner. There wasn't much we could do about hidden bank accounts anyway. The next morning, I drove to Jake's office, having arranged a jewelry appraisal and an estimate for my firearms from a local dealer. Susan went to work briefly, and we met at Jake's office, where I played the audio files from the previous day. I'd like to know who's sending these, Jake said. How they bugged Bonnie and Rich in the hotel is beyond me. A private investigator couldn't have done it that fast. We might need a judge's order to find their bank account balances, which could mean hiring an investigator. Susan and I shook our heads when asked if we had noticed missing money. If you want this divorce quickly, like you said, we'll move fast. Next week, we'll meet with Bonnie, Rich, and their lawyer to list assets, then go before a judge. Louisiana's Napoleonic laws make divorce easier, especially with proven infidelity. Counseling won't help. Once the judge rules, you'll wait 6 months and it's over, Jake added. Boudreaux called, demanding you release an extra 30% of the money you withdrew. I reminded him the prenup states the cheater only gets 20% of assets. He demanded proof of infidelity, which we'll present in court. It was amusing to see him flounder. I'd love to get an audio tape of him advising hiding money offshore into the courtroom. I had to work that weekend. The head nurse, Sharon, couldn't cover my shifts. What if I start coughing and need a COVID test, I asked. Idiot, Sharon said affectionately. Yes, I could fill in. You have vacation and sick days saved up. Take an emergency vacation if needed. I can't believe Bonnie did this to you. How about I work this weekend and start my vacation on Monday, I suggested. Really? Thank you. I owe you one, Sharon said. I'll start your sick leave and then vacation. Take as much as you need and keep me posted. Working was a welcome relief. Weekends were busy, but ICU staff had to stay alert. I was surprised to see my father-in-law, Dr. Pran, waiting for me at the nurse's station. Hello, Dr. Pran. What brings you to the ICU? I greeted him, knowing the staff would be curious. Cut the crap and let's talk, he hissed in the head nurse's office. He asked, What's this about you kicking Bonnie out? She called her mother sobbing. John, I found out Bonnie is having an affair, I said bluntly. She's cheating on me with my sister's husband. I'm dealing with a family crisis. It was a rumor started by gossipers at the office, said John. They commute together and often have lunch together. She told us the rumors about an affair with her boss were just that, rumors. I decided to be open with him despite our history. I haven't told anyone except my lawyer and my sister. I haven't even told Bonnie and Rich everything I know, let alone the kids, I said, holding back my emotions. I have proof, video, and audio files. This isn't just a rumor. Dr. Pran looked shocked. What are you going to do? He asked softly, already knowing the answer. What can I do? I replied. I'm trying to protect the kids, but I can't just ignore this. John, what would you do if Bonnie had proof I was cheating? I'd want your head on a platter. I'd help her bury you, he said honestly with tears in his eyes. What about Jason and Deary? How are they handling it? He asked. They're talking more with their cousins than with Susan or me. They seem to be holding up, but they're angry with Bonnie. I told them they need to talk to her, but I don't know if they have. I'm not getting involved in this. I thought you were overreacting to gossip, JN, he said softly. My first priority is to protect Jason and Deary. I nodded. And I'll help Bonnie with her physical needs. I don't excuse her behavior, but if you have irrefutable proof, I accept it. Stay in touch. You're an honorable man. He walked out, shoulders slumped. I felt more sorry for him than for Bonnie. Wow, Susan said when I got home. So he knows his daughter isn't so virtuous. We need to tell Mom and Dad soon. How about tomorrow night after your shift? We don't want them to be mad at us for keeping them in the dark. I agreed. The meeting wasn't pleasant. My father only asked if I had proof, and I assured him I did. Like John, he was more concerned about the kids than us, which I understood. In our culture, children came first, and adults dealt with the consequences of their actions. Children were protected but informed to learn. I received no additional information from my mysterious benefactor, which was fine. I had 4 explicit videotapes showing Bonnie and Rich, along with audio recordings proving their long-term affair. I didn't need more proof. Bonnie not only cheated but also financially defrauded the family. The mystery of how she saved enough to fly to the Cayman Islands infuriated me. She was a thief and a fraud. Jake began investigating their accounts using social security numbers, ensuring we could subpoena statements if the money was missing. Some questions were answered the following Wednesday when we met to list our total assets. A court-appointed financial arbitrator reviewed the paperwork. I provided my annual salary and Bonnie's pay stub. Bonnie made $5,000 a month, and my salary varied with overtime, but we earned similar amounts annually. Jake said this would allow for minimal alimony, even without the prenup and infidelity proof. On Monday, the auditor requested income tax returns for the past few years. I found them in our desk while Susan had to get copies from her accountant. She was upset that Rich hadn't filed them with other documents. She knew Rich earned about $80,000 compared to her $50,000 and was pleased when Jake said she'd likely get a sizable maintenance payment. Boudreaux entered the conference room with a sullen Rich and Bonnie. Bonnie glared at me, her anger surprising me. I expected an apology, but she remained silent, likely on Bud's advice. Rich struggled to maintain a neutral expression. The court officer introduced himself and his assistant, who took notes and kept an electronic record. Let's get started. Your attorneys have forms for you to sign, confirming that your statements today are true and may be admitted into evidence. Our goal is to compile a list of all assets and income for the judge to review. We won't discuss prenuptial agreements today. Regarding car valuation, we'll use the standard blue book. If the car your child drives is registered in your name, we can consider it separate from community property. If both parties agree, we'll get to the money later. Let's start with Mr. and Mrs. Fontano, listing automobiles. Firearms, the boat, and household goods took only a few minutes. Even Bonnie's jewelry wasn't a problem. I had it appraised, and its value exceeded that of my truck and firearms combined. Boudreaux insisted the solar system be considered separately and prepared a document stating its value and depreciation. Jake reviewed it, made a few notes, and nodded. The 401k accounts were listed. I asked why, thinking they should be excluded. No, they count since you've been married over 10 years, but in your case the values are similar, so it's not a big issue, replied Jake. We then reviewed the checking and savings accounts. Jake entered the statements, showing I had taken 80% of the funds, and did the same for Susan and Rich. It's straightforward, said the auditor, Mr. Jacobs. There's a big discrepancy between Mrs. Fontano's salary estimate and her tax returns for the last 2 years. Rich tensed up. I've estimated each of you earned $600. I explained. I multiplied her monthly salary by 12. Yes, but for the last 2 years, Mrs. Fontano reported an income of $140,000 annually. My incredulous "what the hell" made the assistant frown. Didn't you look at your tax returns? He asked. I shook my head and explained that Bonnie and Rich had a new accountant handle our taxes electronically. I just looked at the small refund we got. Bonnie turned purple. Her salary includes $80,000 in bonuses each year, Mr. Jacobs said. I looked at Boudreaux, and Mr. Jenkins got $110,000 in bonuses each year, Jacobs continued. Susan asked, how much extra was that net? About $80,000 a year, totaling about $160,000. So where's the money, Bonnie? I demanded. Is that why you went to the Cayman Islands last Friday to hide it? Bonnie angrily asked, how did you find out? Are you following me? She then composed herself. No, I didn't need to, I said. You did it yourself. Both you and Susan insisted the kids install phone locator apps. Jason and Deary used it to track you when you didn't answer them on Friday. They saw you reappear near the coast, suggesting you were in the Caymans. Bonnie and Rich looked astonished. They checked your office on Monday and saw you weren't home but in Baton Rouge, likely transferring money into new accounts, I added. Jake spoke up. Boudreaux, we can get statements to prove those account balances. It's illegal to hide money offshore to avoid distributing joint assets. Your clients flew to the Cayman right after hiring you. Hiding assets like this is a felony. Bonnie began to cry, and even Rich looked scared. Boudreaux's face turned pale and then red. I didn't do anything like that, he declared, looking at the recorder and Jacob's assistant typing away. Susan asked Jake, can we get them to return the money? Jake nodded. Yes, we'd get our share in the end, even if we have to confiscate their paychecks. 80% of those accounts will become yours once infidelity is proven in court. But there's no money left, exclaimed Bonnie. It disappeared when we tried to transfer it. Rich tried to silence her, but she continued. I think you stole it, she accused me. I looked at her incredulously. I didn't know for sure about the money until recently. I suspected it, but I had no idea of the amounts. What are you claiming now? Did you spend it all or lose it? Both are nonsense. She explained that they tried to transfer the money electronically at the bank in Grand Cayman, but the transfer was denied. They then went to Baton Rouge to investigate. The online statement showed the transfer, but no routing number or account details. Provide me with the bank information for the Baton Rouge account, and I will investigate, said Mr. Jacobs. Or I can get the results faster and enter them into the court documents. Rich and Bonnie left the room looking dejected. Susan wondered where the money went, and I shrugged, sharing her thoughts. Our case was expedited, likely because Bonnie and Rich had begged Boudreaux to speed things up. They stayed at the Holiday Inn for a week before moving to the apartment on Victoria Street. It amused me to think about them in their love nest, likely struggling with cash flow and Boudreaux's fees. All 5 children insisted on attending the hearing, and I agreed since they were affected by the divorce. Jake explained what to expect. Judge Goody conducted his hearing semi-formally, sitting at the table with us. Jake, Susan, and I sat to Boudreaux's left, with Rich and Bonnie across from us. The kids sat in the gallery. Following Jake's lead, we stood as the judge entered. He waved for us to sit. "I handle family cases in a semi-formal setting," he explained. "Sit and speak when I address you. Raise your hand if you want to speak. Be on your best behavior and respectful. If you piss me off, I'll throw you out. Understood?" The kids managed to hold back their laughter at his last statement. "Well, I've reviewed both cases. Normally we treat these as separate matters, but the evidence and parties involved are the same here. A sibling is accused of infidelity in Louisiana. While infidelity alone isn't grounds for divorce, there are prenuptial agreements that affect property distribution in such cases. Therefore, I'll need irrefutable evidence of infidelity first. There were discrepancies regarding monetary assets, with allegations of hiding funds. My investigation shows Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins have bank accounts in Baton Rouge with balances of $120,000 and $160,000 respectively. The entire balance was transferred from these accounts the Monday before the divorce petition was filed. The correct passwords and security questions were used, indicating the transfers were made by Mrs. Fontano and Mr. Jenkins, or someone they authorized. Further investigation revealed the money was split evenly among 5 accounts belonging to their children: Jason and Deary Fontano and Robert, Dave, and Cynthia Jenkins. These transfers are legal under the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. The accounts were set up years ago, likely for college or income in the event of a parent's passing. I was stunned. Why was Bonnie making such a fuss if she had given the money to her children? The judge continued. The parents showed responsibility, if not remorse, by giving the money to their children. Such deposits are non-refundable unless fraud is proven. Does anyone have proof of fraud? I was thrilled. While I would have liked knowing the money was divided among the children was satisfying. Rich and Bonnie looked shocked, suspecting we had outsmarted them. When Judge Goody asked if we had proof of fraud, we all shook our heads and said no, Your Honor. They seemed terrified of possible charges for hiding money overseas. None of them appeared willing to rebut the judge's remarks. The next matter is the establishment of custody of the minor children, the judge said. My daughter Deary raised her hand. Yes, Your Honor, I read that. Children 15 and older can choose which parent to live with, she said. In some states, yes. In Louisiana, I consider the children's opinions after speaking to them privately, Judge Goody replied. Deary stood and stated, I don't need to talk privately. My mother cheated on my father and our entire family. I want to live with my dad. Jason stood up and agreed. Robert, Dave, and Cindy also stood, stating they wanted to live with their mother for the same reason. My heart raced under the table as I squeezed Susan's hand. I will consider your wishes, Judge Goody said with a half smile, but it hasn't yet been established that there was, as you put it, treason. Deary raised her hand again, and the judge turned to her. I also read that a 16-year-old can petition the court for emancipation, and 17-year-olds can leave home without a petition. Yes, the judge replied. The 17-year-old rule is an old law for young men wanting to enlist in the military without parental consent. For a 16-year-old to petition for emancipation, they must be able to support themselves. Is that clear? Deary nodded. I have a college fund with another $56,000 added to it, plus what my parents and grandparents contributed. Cindy stood up. Me too. Collectively, we have plenty of money to live on our own for a long time. Her brother Dave stood and smiled. Me too. We could rent a nice place together. Jason and Rob stood up and said that if they pulled their money, all 5 could live fine on their own. I glanced at the judge, who seemed to suppress a laugh. Let me guess, if I don't go along with your wishes, you'll all petition for emancipation or leave on your own. The 5 heads nodded. Sit down, he commanded. I'll consider what you said. There's an allegation of infidelity in this case which affects the prenuptial agreement and property distribution, so I'm going to ask for evidence of infidelity. Jake stood up. Your Honor, I have these pictures of Richard Jenkins and Bonnie Fontano together. Boudreaux objected. Anyone can alter photos. I have a picture of me shaking hands with the president and other of us playing golf made by my son. It's a joke. Defense counsel hasn't identified the source of this evidence. Judge Goody looked at Jake, then at Susan and me. Jake nodded for me to respond. Your Honor, the evidence came from an anonymous source. I received several video and audio files and took these screenshots from one of the videos. I have the full video on a DVD and thumb drive. I looked at Rich and Bonnie, who appeared shocked and agitated, shaking their heads in disbelief. Judge Goody observed their reactions, noting their purple faces in clear distress. Okay, do I need to reproduce the file Mr. Fontano provided, or do all parties agree that infidelity occurred? Judge Goody asked. Boudreaux wanted to see the footage, but when Bonnie and Rich quickly pleaded with the judge not to show the video, he backtracked. Could you spare a minute for my clients, Your Honor? After consulting with them, he reluctantly said, "We agree with the plaintiff's claims." "Well, in that case, I will announce my verdict," said Judge Goody. "Since all parties agree infidelity occurred, the marriage contracts will be honored in each case. Susan and I were awarded 80% of the community property. Judge Goody suggested we discuss the actual distribution with our attorneys to avoid court involvement in the details. For custodial parents, I grant Robert Fontano full custody of Jason and Deary Fontano, and Susan Jenkins custody of Cynthia, Robert, and David Jenkins, as requested. The non-custodial parents have full visitation rights. Legally, the divorce will be finalized in 6 months. The increased incomes require Bonnie to pay me $1,000 a month and Rich to pay Susan $2,000 a month for the next 3 years. Each dependent child will receive $500 a month until they turn 18. Jake said the payments were minimal and suggested we could appeal, but I decided against it, and Susan followed my lead. After the judge ended the hearing, we left. Jake said he would arrange a meeting to work out property distribution details. I told the kids to go home, change, and wait for me for a family meeting. Susan and I walked to the back of the courtroom where my father was waiting. "So when did you figure it out, Dad?" I asked. Susan looked puzzled. "It hit me when Deary and Cindy made those comments about the video," I said to Susan. "Pissed off 999 is a personality the kids invented." Susan's mouth dropped open. "No," Dad said. "I figured it out a few days ago when I saw an old credit card bill. Jason and Rob asked me 2 months ago for a credit card to plan something special for your anniversary. They promised to reimburse me about $500. The statement showed a purchase from an electronics company. Initially, I didn't pay attention, but when I called the company, they revealed the kids bought cell phone bugs. The kids spent $500 on spy devices." I asked yes. Apparently, they were expensive. Dad didn't know where they got the video cameras. He followed me home to find out more. All 5 children were waiting in the living room. They fell silent as we walked in. "Go to the kitchen and sit down," I said. Susan grabbed 3 beers, handing one to Dad and me. Jason and Rob held out their hands, grinning. "You may be old enough to be spies, but not old enough to drink," I said. They shrugged, knowing I wasn't angry. "Okay, who wants to start?" "Let's begin at the beginning," Deary began. "It all started when Cindy and I stopped by my mom's office and she wasn't there. Neither was Uncle Rich. This was around the time they began Phase 2 of the COVID lockdown. We thought we could get some money from one of them to see a movie. The receptionist said they were out and had left long ago. It was well past lunchtime, so we decided to track them. You know, we have a locator feature my mom insisted on installing on our phones. It showed they were at a strange address, so we checked it out. It was an apartment building. When we arrived, we saw Uncle Rich's car and waited. They came out later, walking hand in hand and smiling. That got us thinking. So, we started tracking where they went over the next few days. For 3 days straight, they returned to the same place and stayed for about an hour and a half each time. Sometimes they went there late at night after work, but before going home, we told the boys about it. Rob continued. "We searched the internet and found bugs you can insert into cell phones. After downloading an app, it works like a continuous phone call in the background and doesn't interfere with regular calls. It does drain the battery a bit faster. It transmits all the sounds around the phone so you can eavesdrop. We talked Pop into letting us use his credit card to buy them. Sorry we lied a bit, pal." Installing the bugs in the app on their phones was easy. We took turns checking them and eavesdropping on conversations. We recorded anything interesting to share later. "So that's clear with the audio recordings, but how did you get the video and find out which apartment they used?" I asked. "We looked at their keys. They both had a key marked 2011 feet. That's not their office number, so Jason copied his mom's key. We went into the apartment a couple of times and looked around. We decided we needed cameras," Deary explained. "So we bought a few and a small transmitter," added Dave. "That was pretty cool." The boy was excited about the technology. He didn't notice he was describing the end of several marriages and the breakup of 2 families. At least, Susan and I got some answers. The cameras were motion sensitive, so they didn't burn too many batteries. We hid the receiver under the couch. The receiver got information from the cameras and transmitted it to our receiver. We recorded it. It seemed simple. "So, you took a video of Bonnie and Rich doing it? You also recorded audio files and sent some to me?" I spoke carefully. These were my kids, my nephews, and nieces. I couldn't ruin my relationship with them, but there was another issue: money. "Dad, when Cindy and I first looked at that apartment, I realized our mom was gone," Deary stated. "Well, not gone, but not back to where our family used to be. They had clothes stashed away, and Mom had some outfits I recognized. She had a makeup kit, towels, and washcloths too. We knew what they were doing. They'd work out, clean up, and then come home to you and Aunt Sue like nothing had happened. We were all furious. They weren't just cheating you and Aunt Sue, they were cheating us. Now about the money, the secret bank accounts were a side issue, Cindy said. When we looked around the apartment, we found some bank account papers. There were instructions on how to access it online. It took a while to find the actual accounts. We even spent time in Dad and Aunt Bonnie's offices, peeking in on them a couple of times. The receptionist let us in to wait for them. She giggled. We looked through a bunch of folders and finally found one in the bottom drawer of Dad's desk with some applications. Then we looked in Aunt Bonnie's office and found more papers. Aunt Bonnie had a small notebook in her purse with passwords and stuff in it. It didn't say secret bank account, but we could tell the password was unusual, much more so than the one she uses for her cell phone, and it worked. It took a while, but eventually we realized it was the right password. They were using the same password for both accounts. Jason took control of the situation. We already knew they were up to something shady. When we discovered their hidden bank accounts, we got really angry. We wondered if they were dealing pills or embezzling money. Dave was the one who came up with the idea of putting money in our accounts. Dave blushed. Actually, he said, we can't let Dad and Aunt Bonnie get rich and leave us hanging. We read about dividing assets in a divorce, and we didn't like the idea of them keeping half the money either. We had accounts set up by Powwow, and I thought maybe we should take all the money. I thought the cops might catch us, but since we were minors and it was our parents' money, we wouldn't get in serious trouble. We thought it might work, so we did it. If we'd known about the 80 to 20% share, we probably wouldn't have taken it, Deary said regretfully. It actually worked out better that way. And then you guys started sending me video and audio files? I said, looking around the table. I was at least a little relieved to see an expression of restraint rather than outright pride. That was the hardest part, Jason said quietly. We were really mad at Mom and Uncle Rich for what they were doing to all of us. We didn't want to hurt you and Aunt Sue, but we couldn't do anything, so we sent you that first video. We kept trying to get you to visit Mom and Dad. We knew you were upset. If you pulled a weapon out of the safe, we would have told you everything we knew. You'd tell Aunt Sue. We kind of moved on. We already moved the money that Mom hid. I think we stole it. Well, I know we stole it, but we figured they cheated us, so it was only fair. I hope you and Aunt Sue weren't too upset. I looked at Susan, who had a look of amazement on her face from the start. I hope you kids never get mad at me and Sue, I said with a smile. But if you ever nail me like you did your mother and Rich, I'll punch you. The loss of life, even if it's with my walker in a nursing home. They all chuckled at my threat. You'll never have to worry about that, Daddy, said Deary. You'll never let the family down. We're Cajun. We stick together. One thing I don't understand, my dad said. You bought cell phone bugs with my credit card. They were awfully expensive. Where did you get the money for the video cameras from? Yeah, they cost about $500 for each camera because they shot full video with sound and had built-in motion and sound detectors. We got 5 of them, replied Jason. Plus another $500 each for a hidden transmitter that sent a signal to a receiver we hooked up to Deary's computer. That's a total of $3,500 plus shipping. But we can get half of that money back if we return it undamaged. We already pulled all the cameras and the transmitter. We probably lost the cell phone bugs, though. As for the credit card, we used Dad's Visa card. I didn't have a Visa card, I said. So we do now. I applied for it and forged your signature, said Jason. At least he was honest enough not to look guilty. It has a $10,000 limit. We bring in the mail every day, so hiding it was easy, added Deary. Cindy and I set up an email account, pissed off 999 feet. Rob came up with the name. He said what Mom and Uncle Rich did made him mad. The kids smiled and nodded, seeing that Susan, Dad, and I were really impressed. So, the bugs in the cell phones are still active? I asked. Dave nodded. Yes, they work as long as the cell phone batteries are charged. Thanks to that and the phone location app, we know where they are and what they are doing at all times, said Dave. He was thrilled when he realized they weren't in trouble. If one of them is talking on their cell phone, we can hear it. It's voice activated, so it's a lot of car sounds and business talk. We took turns going through the files to pick out anything important. I demanded access to the audio recording as a result. Susan and I had advanced knowledge of Bonnie and Rich's demands at the property division meeting. Bonnie was so eager to get her jewelry that she gave me most of the cash and all of the housewares. We granted some of their requests without much argument, but we made them grovel during the process. Susan shocked everyone except me when she suggested they walk across town with signs on their heads saying, "We cheated on our spouses." The alternative was to appeal the amount of alimony and child support. I thought Boudreaux's eyes would pop out of his head at that threat. We heard Boudreaux tell them they got off easy on the child support payments and warned them that Susan and I would likely appeal the amounts. Susan eventually recanted, forcing them both to apologize on their knees. I don't know exactly how it happened, and I'm willing to swear on a stack of Bibles that I had nothing to do with it. Somehow, 2 months after our hearing, the insurance company that Bonnie and Rich worked for found out that he had rented an apartment for a love nest with company funds. Although everyone in the office had gotten premiums for the past 2 years, for some reason, Bonnie had them much higher than usual each year. Rich managed to get big bonuses too. No one ever figured out why. When all this got out, he and Bonnie were fired. No big deal. The company didn't want any publicity. None of the videos ever made it to the internet. Susan and I couldn't have cared less, and we joked over beers that it would have been fun to make them stars, but the kids didn't want to publicly embarrass themselves. We understood their point of view. Bonnie and Rich now live in New Orleans, working for a small shipping company. Since leaving town, they hardly ever visit the kids, and they rarely even call. Last I heard, they are having a very difficult time paying child support and alimony. I wish them well. Well, maybe not.
Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Ethan was the kind of man who lived by logic, by precision. An infrastructure technology expert, he had an unusual talent for deciphering complex systems and solving problems that would leave others stumped for weeks. At home, however, his life was simpler, almost predictable. He and his wife Lauren lived a quiet routine in a marriage that seemed solid to everyone. 7 years together had built a relationship Ethan believed was based on trust and love. That night, Ethan decided to perform a final test on a new telecommunications system he was working on. The project was challenging, and he was excited to test it at home before presenting it to his company. He connected the devices and began making adjustments. Everything seemed to work perfectly until an unexpected sound emerged from the headphones, a voice. More specifically, Lauren's voice. At first, Ethan thought he had accidentally intercepted an external call. It could happen, though it was rare. But as he adjusted the channels, he realized this wasn't just a random call. It was Lauren, and she was on the phone in the next room. He hesitated, feeling uncomfortable about hearing something clearly not meant for him. But before he could turn off the system, her words froze him in place. So, it's all set. Thursday at 8, at the Corpo a Corpo motel? I'll just say I'm out with the girls. Ethan froze. The words hung in the air, heavy like a storm about to break. He blinked, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, some kind of joke he couldn't contextualize. But Lauren's tone was direct, leaving no room for doubt. Slowly, he removed the headphones, as if the act itself could alter the reality of what had just happened. A heavy silence filled the room, interrupted only by the hum of the equipment he had just been testing. Ethan's mind raced in all directions. He tried to recall any signs, anything that might indicate his marriage wasn't as perfect as he thought. In recent months, Lauren had mentioned frequent outings with her friends, but he never found it suspicious. They trusted each other, or at least, he trusted her. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, taking a deep breath. He wanted to believe he had misunderstood, that it didn't mean what it seemed to. But her words were clear, impossible to ignore or misinterpret. The idea of Lauren, his Lauren, planning a meeting with another man at a motel felt surreal. He didn't know what to do. Confront her? Pretend he hadn't heard? Or let her go ahead and see if she really would? He stood and walked to the living room, where Lauren sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She seemed calm, with that familiar smile that always comforted him after a hard day. It was almost impossible to believe that the same woman, now laughing at something on her phone, could be planning something so devastating. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in his throat. He couldn't explain what he had heard without revealing the test he was running, and the possibility of being wrong haunted him. Without saying a word, he returned to his office and turned off the equipment. But even with the system shut down, Lauren's conversation kept echoing in his mind. He sat in his chair, staring blankly, as a sense of betrayal began to creep into his heart. Ethan always considered himself a practical person, but at that moment, no logic could help him. The only thing he knew for sure was that his life, so carefully organized until then, had just changed forever. In the days that followed, Ethan felt like a stranger in his own life. Lauren continued acting as always, with the same light-heartedness he had admired for years. She laughed at his jokes, commented on the news, and even asked what he thought about rearranging the living room furniture. To any observer, everything seemed perfect. But to Ethan, every smile and word she said carried an unbearable weight. He couldn't stop imagining what was happening behind her facade. Each night was an internal battle. He lay next to her, feeling the warmth of her body near his, wondering if he was fooling himself or if the love they had built over 7 years was about to crumble. He revisited memories, searching for signs he might have missed. Was it the day she came home later than expected? Or the time she mentioned a new friend whose name he couldn't even remember? What once were ordinary moments now felt like pieces of a sinister puzzle he was reluctant to put together. The worst part was the silence. Ethan was a straightforward man, always preferring to tackle problems head-on. But now, he was paralyzed. He didn't know if he should confront her and risk hearing the truth he feared or wait and confirm it with his own eyes. There was something about not knowing that, as painful as it was, seemed easier than facing reality. He felt cowardly, and that only added to the pain. That night, while adjusting the kitchen clock, he heard Lauren's phone vibrate on the counter. She was in the bathroom, and the screen lit up with a message. It was just a name, Sam. Ethan's heart raced. He didn't need to be a genius to connect the dots. It was the name of the man she had mentioned on the call. He stared at the phone for long seconds, fighting the urge to pick it up. But he knew crossing that line would take him into a place he might not return from. Lauren returned and picked up the phone with her usual casualness. She smiled at him, thanking him for adjusting the clock, and began scrolling through it. Ethan tried to observe her reactions discreetly. Was she nervous? Guilty? But no, Lauren was perfectly calm, as if she had no secrets to hide. This confused him even more. How could she act so naturally, knowing what she was planning? The next night, Ethan listened again. This time, it wasn't accidental. He turned on the telecommunication system he had stored in the office and adjusted the headphones. There was a heaviness in his movements, a mix of guilt and determination. When he finally found the right channel, there she was again, talking on the phone. It's all set for tomorrow. I'll leave with the girls around 7, and then I'll meet you. Her words cut like blades into his chest. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to absorb the impact. She was really going through with it. It wasn't a misunderstanding, a joke, or something he could justify or ignore. Ethan took off the headphones and placed them on the table, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time, he realized there was no turning back. The woman he loved was willing to betray everything they had built together. And in that moment, a new decision began to form in his mind. He wouldn't confront her, not yet. He wanted to see with his own eyes how far she was willing to go. More than that, he wanted her to understand the weight of her actions in the most impactful way possible. That night, after hearing Lauren confirm the details of the meeting, Ethan stood in his office, staring into the void. A whirlwind of emotions consumed him, anger, sadness, disbelief. It was as if his world, once so secure, had been ripped out from under him. He wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear him. He wanted to cry, but he felt choked by his own pain. Yet amidst all this, something began to change. Ethan realized he wouldn't let this betrayal consume him. He needed to act, not to save the marriage, but to regain control of his life. And so, like the meticulous technician he was, he began to plan. The next morning arrived like any other. Ethan woke up next to Lauren, who greeted him with a lazy smile. "Good morning, love," she said as she stretched in bed. He responded with a nod, holding back the lump in his throat. He watched her as she went about her routine, making coffee, laughing at something on her phone, exchanging messages. He knew exactly who she was talking to, but he kept his expression neutral. He needed this. He needed her to believe nothing had changed. When Lauren left for work, Ethan finally took a deep breath. He looked around the house and realized everything there was steeped in memories of their relationship. Honeymoon photos in the living room. The birthday gifts she had given him. Even the scent of her perfume seemed to seep into the walls. For a moment, he almost gave up. Maybe it would be easier to pretend nothing had happened, that he had never heard those words. But no. He knew he would never be the same if he ignored what was happening. She had chosen to betray, and he needed to choose how to respond. Ethan grabbed his car keys and left the house. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he needed space to think. He drove for hours, watching the city pass by through the window. People coming and going, living their lives, unaware that his world was in ruins. It was at a small corner pizzeria that the idea struck him. Ethan parked the car and went inside. The place was modest, filled with the smell of baked dough and muffled laughter in the background. He sat at one of the tables and ordered a coffee. As he stirred the cup absent-mindedly, something clicked in his mind. He looked around, noticing the delivery drivers coming and going with pizza boxes in hand. And then, the idea hit him, a pizza. He would send a message Lauren would never forget. Ethan asked to speak with the manager and made an unusual request. He wanted the pizza delivered to a specific motel, along with a personalized note. The manager, though confused, agreed, carefully writing down every detail. While waiting, Ethan pulled a notepad from his pocket and began to write. His hands trembled slightly as he put his thoughts into words. Enjoy your meal. I hope tonight carries as much weight as our marriage. Ethan, he read the note several times before folding it and handing it to the manager. There was no anger in the message, just a contained pain, a silent way to expose the truth. He wanted Lauren to understand, at that moment, what she had lost. When the pizza was ready, Ethan paid in cash and gave clear instructions about the time and place for delivery. Before leaving, he stared at the box for a moment. It was strange to think that something so trivial could carry such heavy meaning. But he knew this would be his final message. From there, he needed to prepare his next move, leaving before Lauren had a chance to explain or manipulate the situation. Back in the car, Ethan drove to a nearby hotel and booked a room. He knew he couldn't go back home that night, not after what he planned to do. As he unpacked his things in the hotel room, he looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize himself. There was a tiredness in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a shadow that made him feel different from the man he once was. But despite this, he felt more certain of his decision than ever. The delivery was scheduled. All he had to do was wait. The night finally arrived. Ethan sat in his car, parked across the street from the motel. The area was discreet, with little activity, like a carefully chosen refuge for secret encounters. He watched from a distance, his mind restless. Every fiber of his being wanted to drive up to the entrance, confront Lauren and the man she had chosen to betray their marriage with. But he held back. This wasn't the time for emotional outbursts. The message would be delivered in a way that spoke louder than any shout. Shortly after 8 p.m., Ethan saw Lauren's car pull into the lot. She stepped out wearing a dress he recognized, the same one she had worn on one of their wedding anniversaries. It hit him like a punch in the gut. It was a dress he had always complimented, saying it made her look radiant. Now, she wore it for another man. The pain was almost unbearable, but Ethan forced himself to watch. Lauren glanced around, as if making sure no one would recognize her, before quickly entering the lobby. The man was already there, waiting for her. Ethan couldn't see him from his position, but he didn't need to. He knew enough. When the door closed behind her, he picked up his phone and called the pizzeria. His voice was controlled, almost cold, as he confirmed that the order was ready for delivery. The attendant assured him everything was set and that the delivery would arrive in a few minutes. As he waited, Ethan alternated between watching the motel and staring at his hands on the steering wheel. He thought about all the nights he had held Lauren's hand, all the moments they had laughed together, planned trips, and dreamed about the future. It was hard to reconcile those memories with the harsh reality unfolding before him. He felt like two people, the man who loved his wife and the man who knew she was betraying him. Finally, he saw the pizzeria's motorcycle approach. The delivery driver parked at the entrance, checked the address, and was met by a motel employee. The pizza box, with the note tucked inside, disappeared behind the doors. Ethan held his breath, imagining the moment Lauren would open the lid and read his words. He wanted to be there to see her reaction, but at the same time, he knew he couldn't bear to look at her directly at that moment. Minutes dragged by like hours. Ethan remained still, every muscle in his body tense. Then, the door to the room opened. Lauren emerged, holding the pizza box and the note. Her expression was one of pure shock. She looked around, as if trying to spot the sender of the message, but the parking lot was empty except for Ethan, hidden in his car at a distance. He watched as she approached the delivery driver, clutching the note with trembling hands. "Who sent this?" she asked, her voice visibly shaken. The driver shrugged. "A man left it at the counter. He's gone now." Lauren stood still for a moment, frozen. It was as if reality had just crashed down on her. She looked at the note again, rereading the words Ethan had written. He could see the confusion and panic on her face, even from a distance. She muttered something to herself, crumpled the note in her hand, and turned back toward the room. But midway, she stopped. Something in her expression changed. With quick steps, she headed toward her car. Ethan watched as she got into her vehicle, started the engine, and left the parking lot. He knew exactly where she was going. Lauren was heading home, but she wouldn't find what she expected. She wouldn't find a man willing to forgive or listen to explanations. Ethan had planned every detail, and now the unfolding events were completely out of his hands. He stayed in the car for a few more minutes, observing the emptiness Lauren left behind. The room where she was supposed to spend the night with another man was now closed and silent. Ethan knew he had broken something in Lauren, but more importantly, he knew he had regained control of his own life. He placed his hands on the steering wheel, took a deep breath, and started driving, not home, but away from that place. When Lauren arrived home, the silence was the first thing to hit her. A different silence, heavy, almost oppressive. She opened the door in a rush, still with her heart racing, and expected to find Ethan sitting on the couch, perhaps with a look of pain or anger, waiting to confront her. But he wasn't there. The living room, usually so warm and full of life, seemed empty, soulless. She called out to him. "Ethan? Are you here?" Her voice echoed through the house without a response. She walked into the kitchen, expecting to see him with a cup of coffee in his hand, as he always did when he was worried. But the kitchen was deserted too. That's when something caught her eye. On the counter, where there used to be a small tray holding his keys, there was now only a thin layer of dust. The keys were gone. Lauren began to feel suffocated by the tension. She hurried up the stairs, each step feeling like a challenge for her trembling legs. When she opened the bedroom door, the sight made her falter. The closet door was ajar, revealing an empty space where Ethan's clothes should have been. No ties, no pairs of shoes. Just hangers swinging slightly, as if mocking her. She ran to the dresser, opening drawer after drawer. His socks, his neatly folded shirts, the watch he always kept in the top drawer, all gone. That's when reality began to piece itself together in her mind. Ethan had left. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Lauren grabbed her phone with shaky fingers. She dialed Ethan's number, hoping he would pick up. The ringing seemed to last forever. When she finally heard his voice on the other end, it was as if an invisible thread pulled her forward. "Ethan." Her voice came out more desperate than she intended. "Where are you? Please come home. We need to talk." On the other end, Ethan's voice was cold, distant. "There's nothing left to talk about, Lauren. My lawyer will contact you in a few days." Lauren gasped. "No. Please, don't do this. I made a mistake, I know. But we can work through this. Please, Ethan, I love you." "Love?" Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. "You chose someone else, Lauren. You chose someone else and destroyed everything we built together. There's nothing left to save." She felt tears streaming down her face. She tried to pull herself together, but his words cut like blades. "I was confused, Ethan. It was a moment of weakness. I never meant to hurt you." "Confused?" he interrupted, his voice rising just enough to show the pain he still carried. "You weren't confused when you scheduled the meeting. You weren't confused when you lied to me, saying you'd be out with your friends. And you certainly weren't confused when you walked into that room with him." The silence returned. Lauren knew he was right. There were no excuses that could erase what she had done. "Please, Ethan," she begged. "Tell me where you are. Let's talk in person. I need a chance to explain." "Lauren," he said after a long pause. "You had your chance. You made your choices. Now, I'm making mine." And before she could respond, he hung up. The sound of the disconnected line left her paralyzed. Lauren looked around the empty room and felt as if the walls were closing in on her. She tried calling him again, but Ethan's phone was off. She felt alone in a way she never thought possible. And for the first time, she fully understood what she had lost, not just her husband, but his respect, trust, and love. Not knowing what else to do, she collapsed onto the bed, sobbing, clutching the crumpled note he had sent with the pizza. The words echoed in her mind over and over, "I hope tonight carries as much weight as our marriage." She knew nothing in the world could erase the weight of that night. Ethan drove through the night with no apparent destination but a clear purpose: to start over. He had already packed and left home before Lauren returned. His car was loaded with only the essentials: clothes, a laptop, a few old photos he couldn't yet part with. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he knew he needed distance. Distance from her, from the betrayal, and from the life he no longer recognized as his own. The streets were empty, illuminated only by sodium vapor lamps casting long, distorted shadows. Ethan found himself driving through unfamiliar neighborhoods, with no set plan, while his mind replayed the events of the past weeks. He wasn't just a betrayed man, he was someone who had trusted blindly, who believed he had built something solid, only to discover it was all an illusion. Every memory of their marriage now felt like a fragment of a puzzle that would never fit together again. Eventually, he stopped at a roadside motel. The neon sign flickered, with half the letters burned out, but the simplicity of the place was exactly what he needed. After checking in, Ethan entered the small room, with a double bed covered in a generic patterned comforter and a worn-out desk. He sat on the bed and stared at his phone for a long time. Part of him wanted to call Lauren, to hear her voice and maybe get an explanation that would make everything more bearable. But he knew that call would only bring more pain. Instead, he opened his laptop and started searching for apartments to rent in another city. He decided the move would be permanent. He didn't want to be the man who, years later, walked through the streets of his old neighborhood and was remembered as the one whose marriage fell apart. He wanted to erase every trace of this phase of his life and start fresh, somewhere no one knew his name, where he could reinvent himself. While browsing, Ethan received a notification on his phone. It was an email from Lauren. He hesitated before opening it, knowing it would be an attempt at reconciliation. The subject line simply read, "Forgive me." He opened the email and read her words. They were filled with regret, promises of change, and pleas for him to come back home. But among it all, one sentence stood out to Ethan. She had written, "I did something terrible, but now I realize I didn't betray you, I betrayed myself. I lost the person who made me want to be better." Ethan closed the email without replying. As sincere as her words seemed, he knew forgiveness wouldn't be enough to erase what had happened. He stood up, looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, and for a moment, stared at his reflection as if he were looking at a stranger. But at the same time, he felt something he hadn't in weeks: relief. For the first time, he was free from doubt, from anguish. Lauren had shown who she really was, and Ethan had chosen who he wanted to be, a man who wouldn't accept less than he deserved. The next morning, he left the motel and headed to a new city. He found a small apartment that was everything he needed: simple, functional, and completely free of any memories of the past. Each step he took brought him farther away from what had hurt him, and each choice was a brick in the rebuilding of his new life. Meanwhile, Lauren stayed home alone, trapped in the emptiness she had created. Each day, she revisited her actions, trying to understand how she had let things get to that point. But no matter how hard she tried, she knew the damage was irreversible. Ethan's note remained tucked away in a drawer, and she read it repeatedly, a bitter reminder of the weight of her choices. Ethan never looked back. He moved forward, rebuilding his life with strength and dignity, while Lauren remained stuck in the past, regretting what she could never undo. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.
I exposed my cheating wife, won custody of my daughters, and rebuilt my life from the ground up. My wife called me in a panic that Friday morning asking me to come home. I left the family business my father left to me and my brother, and rushed home, sensing something serious. Beth, a stay-at-home mom, never disturbed me at work unless it was urgent. I worried something had happened to one of our teenage daughters at school, perhaps a sports injury, since they were very athletic. My daughters meant the world to me, both growing into beautiful young women like their mother. We ran the largest electrical company in the state. I managed the commercial side, while my brother handled residential. We had tripled our volume each year for the past years, making our mother proud. Last year, we netted $5 million for the first time in the company's 50-year history. Since our fathers passed away, we had turned it into a very successful business, now valued at $20 million. My mother, still the majority shareholder with 52%, made John the president, and my brother and I each owned 24%. After our father died, my mother entrusted me with her personal investments, which I aggressively managed with her broker, yielding great results. When I arrived home, movers were packing our belongings. Beth, standing by her new car I bought her, informed me she was leaving for good. Our daughters had already moved without my knowledge. She handed me divorce papers, stating she had fallen out of love and was with someone else. She left abruptly, ending our 17-year marriage coldly, without any explanation or chance to discuss it with our daughters. I suspected she had met someone online, but quickly realized it was local. I asked the movers for the delivery address and was shocked to recognize it. I tipped the driver, asked him to lock up, and made a stop to verify the address. What I saw shattered my life. Beth had left me for someone we both knew well. This betrayal was devastating, made worse by who she was leaving me for. Beth, her brother, and I were inseparable in our youth, though we drifted apart as we grew older. Her brother, now a Marine, remained a good friend, upholding the morals and principles of his upbringing. With my father's business booming, I spent most of my spare time helping out. Sometimes I'd receive stock for upcoming jobs. I asked why he hadn't used his name for the business. He said, "Tate & Sons is overused and often fails. Parrish, your mother's maiden name, adds spirituality." My older brother John, years my senior, often took me along when delivering materials. He got paid, but I used the time to learn. After TH grade, I started an apprenticeship to earn my electrical license while continuing my education online. I graduated high school before finishing my apprenticeship and began a business management degree, which helped expand our business. John learned the business by working every job and picked up some bad habits along the way. I Started bidding on small commercial contracts, completing them under budget, and saving customers money. This word-of-mouth growth exceeded our expectations. My father said I was the brain of the company. JN was the brawn, and both were essential for success. At 20, living on my own, JN called me drunk, needing a ride from a wild party. I went to get him and found Beth needing a ride too. Her father was strict, and she feared his reaction if she didn't get home. Beth, now 17 and stunning, had become a beautiful young woman with mesmerizing blue eyes and a captivating smile. I agreed to drive her home. Her father was relieved to see me instead of her date, saying, "You should have told me your date was James." A week later, Beth found me at my father's shop, asking me to take her to her senior prom. I agreed after getting her father's permission. That night we decided to be exclusive, marking the start of our relationship. Now it was ending. 20 minutes later, I arrived at our office, angry and determined. I went to John's office. His door was shut, and his receptionist said he was on a serious personal call and had locked the door for privacy. "Mary," I said, "please come into my brother's office with me. I need you to witness what I have to say." Mary saw the anger on my face and knew it was serious. "Of course," she replied. I then kicked the door open, barging in. John looked up in surprise and quickly ended his call, giving me his full attention. "You need to get this business appraised and buy my shares out by the time my divorce is final. Do you understand that, John?" Mary was shocked. She had never heard me raise my voice before. "What's this about?" Jan asked. "The movers gave me Beth's new address. I saw my daughter's there," I said. "She's staying with me until she finds a place." Jan replied coldly, "That's a lie." I said, "She told me she was moving in with the man she loves and handed me divorce papers." John turned pale, speechless. Mary looked horrified, realizing John had been unfaithful. "How long have you been lovers?" I demanded. "Were those afternoons I covered for you so you could be with her? I should get tested for STDs, given the women you've been with." Jan went even paler. "This isn't the time or place to discuss this," he said quietly. "Screw you. There will never be a right time for this. Go to the bank or put the business up for sale. We're done as partners and brothers." "James, there must be another way. We need you," John pleaded. "We can talk when you're calmer." In pure anger, I picked up his desk phone and called our mother, putting it on speaker. "Mom, I have bad news," I said. "Today is my last day. I'm resigning, effective immediately. John needs to buy out my shares." What she said shocked me. "You love that business. What happened?" "Ask John. He's not in his office because his secret lover is moving in today. They're getting married after her divorce. You might want to visit and meet her." I hung up. JN was furious but couldn't speak. He had been bragging about his new love for months at family dinners. "Mary, follow me to my office to ensure I don't take anything belonging to the company. I want a signed statement that I turned over all keys and only took personal items." John was visibly angrier as I openly expressed my distrust of him. Before leaving, I said, "Should I walk out backwards so you can't stab me in the back again? What you and Beth did is worse than if you had just shot me." We walked back to my office where my receptionist was working. "Joanne, please come in, witness what's about to happen." "Mary will appreciate having another witness," I said. "James, what's going on?" Joanne asked. "I've quit because JN has stolen my wife and children," I replied. I was called home to be served with divorce papers. The movers gave me Beth's new address, which turned out to be John's. Both our long-term executive assistants were shocked. These wonderful ladies had been our support for years, and I deeply respected them. "Let's list everything James takes and the keys he gives us," Mary suggested. "We'll type it up, witness it, and make 5 copies. Joan and I will each take a copy home for safekeeping." Her suggestion showed their trust in the company president. It made me wonder what else my brother was hiding. It took about an hour to complete. I called security to escort me out and verify what I was taking. I watched as the ladies put the extra copies in their purses. JN had rushed out without saying goodbye, hoping to avoid the drama. Everyone saw the top 2 executive assistants escorting me out with tears in their eyes. I kissed them on the cheek and thanked them for their support. I stepped out, took the single box from the security officer, and left. As soon as I left, everyone wanted to know what happened. The ladies explained what they knew. I opened my trunk, threw the box in, and closed it. On my way through town, I stopped at a real estate office and listed the house. I gave the representative my wife's cell number, saying she would need her signature. I told her my soon-to-be ex would decide the list price. At home, I found only their personal belongings and our daughter's bedroom furniture were taken. I turned off my cell phone. I read the divorce papers. The grounds were emotional and mental cruelty. She was asking for primary custody of our daughters, Bayu and Bree, offering me supervised visitation once a month. Beth thought I was too strict because I wouldn't allow our 13 and 15-year-old daughters to date without a chaperone. She felt my old-fashioned views were too restrictive for today's society. I had argued that I didn't want our daughters to ruin their lives by getting pregnant in school. I wanted the best for them, but Beth thought my views were hurting their development. She felt I was treating our daughters like her father had treated her, and she had rebelled against him. Beth was going for my throat because of our differing views on parenting. I poured myself a stiff drink and tried to find something on TV to distract me, but only found outdated reruns. I must have passed out drunk because I woke up with a hangover on the living room sofa. I showered, shaved, and got ready for the day. After breakfast, I did my usual Saturday morning chores. Around 1 p.m., I turned my cell phone back on. I had messages from my mother, brother, wife, and daughters. I believe my daughters were in on what was happening and sided with their mother. The only message I trusted was from my mother. The rest didn't matter to me. I listened to the messages, then deleted them. My wife's message said we could reach an agreement once I calmed down. The real estate agent called me. "Mr. Tate, your wife finally showed up this morning, but she was not happy," Miss Waterston said. "She was shocked you're including the furniture with the house. After seeing comparable homes, she agreed to add $20,000 for the furniture." "Thank you for the update," I replied. "I want it sold quickly because it holds too many memories." "She broke down, not expecting you to do this," Miss Waterston continued. I asked her, "What did you expect? You left him for his brother." "She was surprised about you demanding to be bought out from the family company. I just want to get away from them," I said. "In the divorce, she's trying to take the kids completely from me. She seems shocked. I told her she might fool others, but I know how people like her think. Miss Waterston, I've arranged for a good divorce lawyer. I'll text you her details," I said. I thanked her and hung up. Just then, I saw my sister Connie's car pull in. I finished making my coffee and went to let her in. "It must be important for you to drive halfway across the state," I said. "Mom was devastated when she found Beth and your daughters at JN's place," Connie said. She couldn't believe it. "How long has it been going on?" I asked. "Mom found out from Beth that it's been about 2 years," Connie replied. "How could I have been so blind?" I said. "Before we talk more, read the divorce papers. I'll get you some coffee." Connie read the papers, noting how exaggerated everything was. "Beth wants you out of your daughters' lives," Connie said. "Most of her claims are nonsense. Mom doesn't want you leaving the family business, so Mom wants me to accept being John's cuck and cow," I asked, noting Connie's shock. "Oh my God," Connie swore, surprising me as she never used foul language. "How do I explain this to Mom?" Connie asked. "She won't understand the full betrayal." "Mom might see the infidelity and breakup, but not why I'm leaving the company," I said. "I can't stay knowing John turned my wife and children against me just to keep Mom's approval. Your husband makes business deals, he could find a buyer for the company. John has left you no choice. You have to write him out of your life," Connie said. "He knew what he was doing, and it was deliberate." Connie called her husband, explaining everything. When she hung up, she said, "He'll have a team appraise the company Monday. I need to convince Mom it's the best solution." I pulled out the last 5 years of financial records and handed them to her. "Your husband will need these," I said. "What about BU and Bree?" Connie asked. "That's up to Judge Donald McDonald. I wanted Dale Britton, but he's tied up with a big case. Her lawyer is painting an ugly picture," I said. Connie and I talked briefly before she left to speak with our mother. I didn't sleep well that night, missing my wife beside me. I decided to leave town for a few days after meeting the lawyer, needing space to think clearly. Connie called after she and Mom spoke with the pastor. He said, "The one who has been injured the most may never get over it. What they did to him was despicable, but common today because love and decency have lost their value. They are just tools to manipulate and control others." Mom was shocked when the pastor said, "James isn't the first to be destroyed by family and won't be the last." Mom agreed to sell the business, Connie explained, not because of what John did, but because she knows John would ruin it without you. She wants to know who should take your place. "Does she understand I consider John dead to me?" I asked. "Yes, and why?" Connie replied. I had to explain what being a cuck means. Mom swore she'd liquidate Beth if she saw her again. "Tell Mom to appoint Carl Robertson as president. He knows everything I do and can prevent John from overriding him. It's essential for getting the best price for the company." "Mom needs to demote JN publicly," I said. "Should we warn John?" Connie asked. "No. If Mom can't do it, she should appoint you as CEO until the company is sold. I must stay out of it to avoid it being used against me in divorce court." Connie agreed to check with her husband and later texted, "I'm the new CEO. I'll implement your suggestions tomorrow." I was having brunch when Beth called. This time I answered. "Can we talk?" Beth asked. "No. If you or your lover contact me again, I'll file maltreatment charges. Everything will be settled in court, I said. We need to discuss Beau and Bree, Beth said. There's no reason for you to leave the family business now. We'll sort this out in court, I said. I'm requesting paternity tests to determine if they are JN's or mine. We all deserve the truth, and I'll never return to anything involving it, Beth gasped. They're yours, and you know it. I thought I had a loving wife until Friday. I was wrong about that, so I must consider I might not be their father either. John could have been deceiving me for years, I said. Beth started crying, but I hung up. I then called my former assistant, Joanne, for advice from her husband, David, who had gone through a tough divorce. David arrived, read the divorce petition, and I explained everything. Let's be clear, David said. You don't know. When the affair started, other than hearsay. Yes, that's true, I said. In court, you'd be justified in requesting paternity tests due to the family situation. The way you found out implies long-term deception. Judge Donald McDonald will need biological proof before making any rulings, David said. Is the judge that strict? I asked. Yes. My divorce took 6 months, but his rulings prioritized our children's needs. It was tough, but ultimately he made the right decision, David explained. I offered David a drink, and we were chatting about his relationship with Joanne when a truck pulled into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw it was my brother, John. That dares to show up here after what he did, I said. I wish I had one of Dad's 22 seconds. David said, sit down, I'll handle this. If he won't leave, I'll show him my badge. He doesn't want to deal with the Cape Girardeau police. He opened the front door and lowered the screen window so I could hear their conversation. John slammed his truck door and yelled, "Where's my stupid brother?" I told him we could work it out, but he wouldn't listen. Now he has to, because I need to straighten him out. If he won't listen, I'll shove my fist down his throat. No, David said. Go home and cool down before you do something you'll regret. Screw you. Get out of my way. I left Beth in tears because he's questioning the paternity of daughters. He needs to be straightened out, and I'm the one to do it. So when did the affair start? David asked. Years ago, if it's any of your business, John replied. Interesting, because Beth told your mother yesterday it was years ago, David said, showing his badge. I have to wonder what the truth is, since both of you are making the other look like a liar. After making James an unknowing cuck, you expected him to accept it and carry on as if nothing happened? Was it your plan to break him and make him your submissive? What gives you the right to think your brother should do as you say? John was stunned into silence, revealing they hadn't planned this out. David added, I wonder what the judge will say about this recorded conversation. I suggest you get back in the truck and prepare Beth for the paternity test. Your story lacks credibility, and any further explanations will be seen as more lies. I watched John walk back to his truck, realizing things were not going as planned. David waited until John drove away before coming back inside. What's your lawyer's name? He asked. I'll contact her on Monday and send a copy of this recording. I gave him the details. Why did you bring your police cam? I asked. It's standard in domestic situations, David explained. When Joanne told me why you needed to talk, I knew anything could happen, so I came prepared. Let Joanne know I'm leaving town after seeing the lawyer, I said. It's best I stay away for a while. Is it anything the cops might be called about? David asked. Our older sister is now the CEO of the family company. Tomorrow she'll appoint Carl Robertson as president. My brother will be demoted to vice president, I explained. This is happening why? David asked. Mom doesn't want my brother destroying what my father and I built before she finds a buyer, I said. I agree with your reasoning, David said. You should be packed to leave right after your lawyer appointment. John will see it as all you're doing. From what I've learned, he's hot-headed and reacts without thinking. He could do anything. After David left, I cleaned up the kitchen and went to Ace Hardware for a new lock set for all the doors. It took 2 hours to install. I was about to change the house security system code when my phone rang. It was Beth's father. What's going on, James? Beth's father asked. My granddaughters have been calling from an unknown number because Beth confiscated their phones and yours is never on. Did you ask Beth why? I asked. She says it's personal and will explain later. Katie and I want answers now. Beth moved out on Friday, I said. She called me home as the movers finished and served me divorce papers. She said she's in love with another man and that his name doesn't matter. Are you serious? He asked quietly. Yes. The movers gave me her new address because Beth wouldn't. She moved in with my older brother. They've been in a relationship for 2 to 5 years, depending on who you ask. She doesn't want me to have any contact with Beau and Bree and is asking for 1 hour a month supervised visits. Why would she do that? You've been a great father. She probably doubts I'm their biological father. My lawyer will request DNA tests to confirm. Also, I'm no longer involved in the family business. It sounds like she knows who their real father is. What should I tell my granddaughters? Tell them the truth, which they haven't been getting from their mother. After we said goodbye, I reset all the codes. Then I went to Golden Corral for a bite. I had just left the lawyer's office at 11 a.m. She agreed it was a mess, but thought the video David sent would undermine the plaintiff's credibility. She believed their stupidity had put me in the driver's seat. I had canceled all of Beth's debit and credit cards and removed her from all bank accounts. My next stop was the real estate office to give them the new house key and access code. Then I hit the road south. About an hour later, Joanne called. "Just checking you're on the road," she said. "Connie just walked in to meet Carl Robertson." "I left about an hour ago after dropping off the keys," I said, heading south with no particular destination. "We'll call to update you," Joanne said. "Text me first so I can pull over," I replied. I stopped at a rest area and finally let my emotions out. After a while, a police cruiser pulled in. The officer got out and approached me. "I saw you pull in 2 hours ago and got concerned," he said. "I've been through a lot emotionally and decided not to drive," I explained, "going through a divorce." He asked with a knowing smile, "Yes, how did you guess?" "The road south with no destination is a common choice," he said, handing me a cold soda from his cooler. We chatted until a text message came in. "Need privacy?" he asked. "No, you might find this interesting," I said, putting the call on speaker. "How did it go, Joanne?" "Carl accepted the president position temporarily, knowing it was your suggestion," Joanne said. He and Connie informed John of his removal. John didn't take it well and refused the vice president position. Carl told him, "I guess you've decided to quit. Let me call security to escort you out." John cursed and blamed you for everything. "So my brother is unemployed like me," I said. "That must hurt his pride." "Off the record, James, I think that was Connie and your mother's plan all along," Joanne said. "Expect a call from Connie shortly." The police officer saw me smile as I began to explain my wife of 17 years left me for my brother last Friday. I resigned as vice president from the family business and demanded they buy out my shares. They didn't see it coming. I had just finished explaining when Connie called, so I put her on speaker. "When can you get back here?" Connie asked. "Why, it sounds like you have everything under control," I said. "Carl is perfect for the job. My husband lined up financing so you can buy John's shares. Mom wants him out. He'll use a business loan for it. Carl agreed to be vice president if you return as president." "Fine. I'll meet you at Mom's around 6 tonight," I said. "Tell Joanne to order new office furniture and repaint the offices. If she gets it right, I'll give her a 10% raise." We said goodbye, and I smiled. "What's the name of your company?" the officer asked. "Parish Electrical. We're in about a third of the state and always expanding." "Your logo is no job is too big or too small," he said. "That's right. It was my dad's favorite saying," I replied. We talked for a bit more. He gave me his business card and directions to reverse my rot. I appreciated his kindness as he followed me out. Back in town, I noted his card's details before heading to my parents' place. Around, my mother met me at the door, and we shared a quiet moment. Connie was at the airport, picking up her husband. Mom and I chatted until my phone rang. It was Beth's father. "Hi, Dad, what's up?" I answered. "Have you heard rumors about your brother in the workyards?" he asked. "Let me step out before I answer," I said. "Yes, but I've seen no proof. Why?" "He has illegal videos on his home computer. Bayou and Bree found them and called us. They're scared to be near him. We picked them up from school, but I don't know what to do. Call Joe, explain, and say you're giving the kids sanctuary. Use a throwaway phone to avoid detection," I advised. "Why call Joanne?" he asked. "Her husband's a cop. He'll handle it," I said. "Thanks for helping. My daughters, text me your number." I talked to my daughters until my mom said the police wanted to speak with me. I ended the call and texted the number to my mother-in-law's phone before clearing my messages. "David, good to see you. What's up?" "Your daughters are missing, and your phone was busy. Beth filed a kidnapping complaint against you." I looked at my concerned mother. "When did they disappear?" I asked. "After school at 2:30, David said. I handed him the state trooper's card. "Call him, you'll understand." David called, and my mother saw his relieved smile as the call ended. "I should have known," David said. "You have the perfect alibi. You were an hour away, sharing a soda with another officer when your daughters disappeared." David then received 5 text messages in a row and stepped outside to make a call. When he returned, he asked to speak with me privately. We went into another room and closed the door. "What do you know about the rumors about your brother?" he asked. "People say he likes them younger than he should," I said. "I always kept my girlfriends away from him because I had suspicions." "Why?" "Your daughters found something disturbing on his computer." They told someone at school and are now in sanctuary while we investigate, David said. I sat down, head in hands. When I reconnected with Beth at 17, she ran with a wild crowd. I picked up my drunk brother that night, and she asked for a ride home. I wonder if John was her date. I wish you could prove that, David whispered. Tell your daughter's protectors we won't charge them. I need a few days to resolve this. Your mistake was giving them my wife's number. It's Beth's parents. I had no clue, I said, but I told them to use a disposable phone. David laughed. Be thankful for carrying in-laws. I'll get a warrant for your brother's computer and might need your daughters to testify. We returned to the living room, and I escorted the officers to the door. Just as I opened it, Beth walked in. Are you arresting James for kidnapping? She asked. No, David said. He has an alibi. He was with a police officer when your kids disappeared. Beth's face turned white. Maybe the girls ran away because they don't want to live with you, I said. David, should I go home in case they show up? Smart idea. They can decide where they want to live, David said with a grin. Call me if they show up. After the officer left, I turned to Beth. Was my brother your date the night I gave you a ride home when he was drunk? Her expression confirmed it. I guess I know how long you've been with him. My mother, furious, yelled, James, throw her out now! If I see her again, I'll use one of my husband's rifles. Run, Beth, I said. She might shoot you now. Beth fled in fear. I couldn't help but laugh. Well played, Mom, I said. She believed it. I meant it, she replied. I called Beth's father. Can you bring Mom and the kids to my mother's for dinner? Are you serious? He asked. We're celebrating my daughter's return. No more problems with Beth or the police. We're on our way, he said. Mom, the girls need to stay here until I can get furniture. Is that okay? Why don't you all move here until the divorce is final? Mom suggested. I'll take them shopping for new clothes tomorrow. Sounds good to me, I said. Make sure they get new cell phones. Beth took theirs to prevent contact with me. Mom informed the kitchen staff about the extra dinner guests. I brought in my suitcases and suits. Mom showed me my room. Beth was not happy. She was worried sick about her daughters and was sure James had taken them. She was proven wrong, and her true relationship with John was exposed. John had taken her pureness before she reconnected with James. After their second daughter was born, John decided he had to reclaim Beth. She resisted for a long time. One Wednesday afternoon, while James was on a business trip, J.N. showed up at their house. He took her in his arms, kissed her, and soon they were having lovemaking. John declared loudly that he was claiming Beth as his woman. She allowed him to take her 3 times that afternoon, engaging in raw, animalistic lovemaking. Afterwards, John whispered to her that he had always loved her and felt complete only with her. That night, she found him unclothed in her bed, and they made love until they fell asleep. Thursday, after sending the girls to school, they had lovemaking all day. On Friday, J.N. came back and reinforced his claim over her. She admitted she was owned by him and showed her submission by giving him a head before James came home and kissed her deeply. Beth believed she would have gotten pregnant by John if she hadn't had her tubes tied 6 months ago. After almost being caught by her eldest daughter, John decided they should move in together. They thought James would accept their relationship after some time, but he didn't. Instead, he caused a storm, resigning from his job and questioning the paternity of his daughters. John returned home one afternoon to tell Beth he had been pushed out of the company by their new CEO, his sister. They realized they had unintentionally destroyed James's life. Now they faced the consequences of their actions, including societal judgment, branding James a cuck. Even Beth's parents were ignoring her calls and texts. She needed to bridge the gap with James and start talking. She called him to ask if he had heard anything about their daughters. James answered on the 3rd ring. James, have you heard anything about the kids? She asked. No, but I don't think you need to worry, he said. Why do you feel that way? She asked. Because if they are as lucky as you, they'll be picked up by a man like John, who will train them to be eager and willing just like he did to you. Beth ended the call and sat crying in her car. James had cruelly pointed out how people probably viewed her relationship with J.N. He had always feared his daughters would become easy and saw John as someone who always had a woman. In James's eyes, J.N. had just moved the biggest one ever into his home. Beth felt ashamed, used, and owned in a way she had never experienced before. She realized how different James and J.N. were. James wanted her to be a better person, filled with love and quality. John wanted a classy woman who would fulfill his desires. She had abandoned her morals and principles, and now everyone knew it. At my mother's place, we celebrated with my daughters. Beth's parents and I shared hugs, relieved after 4 trying days. The girls were delighted to see Aunt Connie and Uncle Tom. During the meal, we discussed our temporary plans until the divorce was finalized, which the girls were happy about. We decided to leave business matters for the next day. Beth's father and I took a walk to talk privately. "James, how long has my daughter's relationship with your brother been going on?" he asked. "Since the first time I brought her home from a wild party my brother was attending." Beth admitted that John was her date that night, I said. His eyes teared up. "Then why did Beth start chasing you?" "I believe John and Beth weren't serious back then," I said. "That night, she saw me differently. Our early years of marriage were good, but John started desiring what I had and began chasing her. Jan was always more aggressive. Your father told me John felt he was always trying to live up to you because your standards were so high." "I never knew that," I said. "It's sad." John dragged Beth down with him. "The police will seize his computer this week. If they find what we suspect, Beth will get supervised visitation of her daughters. She deserves it," Beth's dad said. "Some people have to learn the hard way." I arrived late to the office Tuesday morning, enjoying reconnecting with my daughters. My mother was thrilled to have a girls' day out with her granddaughters. At the office, employees lined up clapping. Carl Robertson, Mary, and Joan all shook my hand. I told Carl we'd redo his office after finishing the president's office. The newspaper announced my appointment as president and Carl's promotion to vice president, noting John Tate was no longer with the company. The phone started ringing with new business opportunities, most because John was no longer involved. It made me wonder how much business he had cost us over the years. I left the office to pick up the rest of my clothes from my former home, knowing Mom and the girls were still shopping. While loading my car, John attacked me from behind. The last time we fought, he had stricken me badly. I grabbed a tire iron and struck his leg, making him release me. A neighbor called the cops, who broke up the fight and arrested John for being the aggressor and drinking. I collapsed and woke up in the hospital with cracked ribs, internal bleeding, and bruises all over my body. My mother said I looked like a character from Soylent Green. John was charged with aggravated assault. My daughters were emotionally upset by my condition and what had happened. "Bayu and Bree, what happened to me was because your mother and uncle acted on their emotions without thinking," I said. "People like that lose their ability to see things clearly, making their situations worse. I'll recover, but they may not." The girls and my mother stayed with me until I fell asleep. The next morning, Connie, Mom, and Tom visited to get the loan. Tom wanted us to expand north. A competitor had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and Tom suggested we take over their contracts and make a low offer on their equipment and buildings. "Why not just buy controlling interest in their shares?" I asked. Tom explained that their debt was too high, and we'd be stuck with costly union contracts. Mom then surprised us by saying James has effectively been running the company for years. I want to give him 27% of the shares to have complete control, because we can't count on JN agreeing to sell. The rest goes to Connie. Thanks to James's investment skills, I have enough to live comfortably. "Does anyone object?" she asked. "I do," I said. "I'll agree if Tom becomes our CFO. He may take a pay cut, but that's the sacrifice." Connie teared up because our father had never accepted Tom. My offer meant everything to her. "I'll even cover your moving costs and house purchase if you say yes." Tom, flabbergasted, shook my hand and said, "I'd be honored." Mom was thrilled her daughter was moving home. After they left, I called Carl to discuss our plans. He mentioned that the assets and contracts we were pursuing had political support. I stressed that if the court accepted our offer, we needed to act quickly. I was released from the hospital on Friday. Mom picked me up and drove me to my house to pack. Connie would arrive the next morning to house hunt. My body was healing, and my lawyer had secured restraining orders against Beth and John. Beth's parents had visited 3 times. "It's been a quiet few days," Mom said. "It gave the girls time to adjust. I've had to explain the consequences of people's choices." "How are my daughters emotionally?" I asked. "They're handling it better than I would have," she said, "but they need some private time with you. They have the whole weekend with me if needed," I said. "I'll stop by the motor vehicle office for Bree's learner permit materials. Tom has given notice and completed the company's valuation. Connie will bring the report. His firm offered him a huge raise to stay, but he turned it down, saying his sign-on bonus was a new house. Tom has the knowledge we need for this growth," I said. "Bringing him into the family business is overdue." "Why wasn't it done before?" Mom asked. "The president wouldn't approve it," I said. When we arrived at my house, I thanked her and went inside. I found a letter from Beth in the mail and threw it away. It was too little, too late. How can someone be sorry for deliberate actions? I called a cleaning service to remove the food, clean the place, and shut off the water and equipment. I gave them the alarm code and said I'd drop off a key in 2 hours. It took about an hour to pack my clothes and personal items. Before leaving, I shaved, leaving a mustache and goatee for a new look. David called to inform me that John's place had been raided and his computer seized. John's lawyer was negotiating a plea deal. My daughters were already back from school at Mom's. They helped me move and unpack my clothes. Afterward, we laid on the bed and had a long chat. The topic of lovemaking came up. When you have loving just for lovemaking, it's to satisfy animalistic needs, I explained. Making love is about putting the other person first, strengthening the bond. What brought Uncle Jane and Mom together, Bu asked. Was it love or just physical attraction? Your uncle wanted what I had, I said. He let his desire grow until he acted on it. At first, your mother may have been overwhelmed, but she became attracted to its raw intensity. Each encounter reminded them of that first day, pulling them together. Eventually, their desire led to a long-term relationship built on lies and deceit. I worried I made it sound complicated, but Bree surprised me by saying, basically, they went for what the other was offering without enough morals to walk away. What do you mean? Bu asked. My red dress that you want so much, Bree said. I taunt you with it because I know you want it. That's what Mom and Uncle John did with their physical appearances. Bree left the room and returned with the red dress Bu wanted, handing it to her sister. She said, what I did was wrong, like them, but to a lesser degree. I'm sorry, sis, the dress is yours. I got up, opened the dresser top drawer, grabbed the booklet and tossed it to Bree, saying, start studying. You can get your learner's permit in months. Bree squealed with delight. Thank you, Daddy. My daughters were growing up and had learned an important life lesson. I was very proud of them. Mom asked what they wanted for supper, and they chose mac and cheese. We had a delightful meal with pork chops and baked beans. After supper, still weak and recovering, I went to bed early. Around midnight, Bu crawled into bed with me. As I cuddled her, I couldn't help thinking that Beth would have twisted this innocent moment into something inappropriate. Connie brought me a proposal for the bankruptcy court that needed my signature. If approved, we'd double our size. Carl and I reviewed and signed it. On Monday, Joanne sent it to the state capitol by courier. I informed Joanne she'd now earn annually, effective immediately. Later, Joanne closed my office door for a private conversation. David wants you to know what's going on, she said. You have my attention, I replied. The images on your brother's computer are of unlocal girls, Joanne explained. David suspects it's a trophy list of girls John took advantage of, including Beth. This can be used in your divorce to question his motives for wanting Beth to move in, implying he sought access to your daughters. I'm not surprised, I said. Workers had mentioned John's pictures of conquests. John was 23 when he was with Beth at 17, legally statutory assault. This pattern will help in my divorce, but we need to figure out how to use it. David will prepare an internal report, Joanne said. It will be up to the district attorney to decide on the charges. David will bring a copy home for you. Sounds good. Tell David I owe him one, I said. David was overwhelmed by your generosity, Joanne said. Mary has also been rewarded with a promotion to junior management. Connie's husband is joining as CFO. We need to find a qualified assistant within our staff. Once we pick her, we'll discuss her new responsibilities and use John's former office furniture for her setup. Why? We might double our size soon and go statewide. There will be days when management is tied up or out of the office, I explained. You and Mary, as executive assistants, will make decisions on our behalf, once fully trained, so we need to ensure we can trust the new assistant like you trust us, she said. Any issues with Mary and the new assistant will be your responsibility. If you need advice, you can always ask me, I said. Joanne left with a proud look. When I left for the day, Mary and Joanne were deep in discussion. Carl told me the new structure is brilliant. We're planning for the new openings. If our offer is accepted, Human Resources is compiling a list for relocation and promotion. Good thing I included a 30-day notice before acceptance to prepare, I said. Connie's husband Tom is joining as CFO. Without his financing arrangements, we couldn't have done this. John will be contacted about buying out his shares this week. Anything happening on the divorce end? Carl asked. We have a court hearing this week for the blood tests, I said. We were the last case called before Judge Donald McDonald that Friday. Contrary to his reputation, the judge was not a tall or broad man. He was about 5 feet 10 inches and 180 lbs, appearing to be in his late 50s. My lawyer explained the relationship between Beth, John, and me, detailing how Beth and I had reconnected and how I discovered her affair with my brother. She presented an affidavit from my mother, stating Beth admitted the affair had been ongoing for 2 years, and played a video recording from David, which caught the judge's interest. I explained what happened the day Beth accused me of kidnapping my children, and the judge looked increasingly concerned. Beth's lawyer tried to counter our claims, but struggled. The judge finally spoke. There's enough evidence to suggest an ongoing affair between Beth and John Tate, implying one brother may have tried to pass off his parentage on the other. A DNA test is the only way to determine the children's true parentage. The judge continued, John Tate's, Disclosures to the cop and his response are crucial. The divorce will be granted to James Tate on the grounds of infidelity. Beth was devastated, and John glared at me in rage. The judge implied they had been manipulating me for years. As we were leaving, I noticed Beth's parents and her older brother preparing to exit the courtroom, looking pained. When Beth approached them, they turned their backs on her, signifying that she was now shunned by them due to their religious views. I approached Beth with my lawyer. Beth, you must be proud. You've destroyed 2 families in less than a month. Bayo and Bree are doing well. As we left, Beth started to cry. Outside, her family waited for me. Mom, Dad, do you want the girls for the weekend? I asked. Mom hugged me, saying, we'd love to. Beth's brother Ted extended his hand. Good to see you, old friend. If my daughters don't tire you out tomorrow, I said, let's go out for a late supper and a few beers. I'm coming home for good, Ted said. 20 years is enough. I'm here to house hunt and find a job. My phone rang. It was Joanne. The 30-day countdown is on, she said excitedly. Thanks. Let Carl know I found the head for our resource department, if I can convince him to join us. How did it go in divorce court? Joanne asked. I'll explain when I get back, I said, turning to Ted. I offered, how about starting at $60,000 a year? After 6 months, you could be head of Parrish's new resource department. Interested? What's involved? Ted asked. Managing purchasing, distribution, and inventory for 3 hubs. Supplies for retail stores and commercial sites will be delivered from these hubs, I explained. Of course, I'll take it, Ted said. James, Beth's dad added, show him your house. If he's interested, I'll cover his down payment. Ted and his wife decided to make an offer on the house at full price. I accepted, and all that remained was Beth's signature. Ted was amazed at how easily they could start over. I stopped at a wine shop and picked up 2 bottles of wine, cheese, and crackers before heading back to the office. The upper management team had a small celebration before calling it a night. My daughters called to ask if they could go with their grandparents for the weekend. I pretended to be surprised but said, go ahead and have fun. When I returned to my mother's, I told her about my day. Ted is getting a great deal on the house. The items you're including are worth more than they're paying. Ted's family will be well set up. No matter what Beth did, Ted will be diligent. You always take the high road, Mom said. Your father would be proud, just as I am. Thank you, Mom. It means a lot, especially since I'm still hurting because I still love her, I said. By the way, John sold his shares to me for $1 million through my lawyer, so I guess I'm staying on the board. What motivated him? I asked. He said he was never happy in the industry and stayed because it was family-owned. They're moving to Florida to develop property he owns there, Mom explained. I smiled, knowing our business was worth over $1 million according to Tom's report. We secured $15 million, spending $10 million to buy assets and contracts up north for pennies on the dollar. Tom believed we could recoup close to $7 million after streamlining operations. We would rebrand the fleet and use local contractors, incentivizing them with a 10% Christmas bonus, tax-free. This strategy had always improved customer satisfaction. Mom dragged me to a community fundraiser for a family raising money for their daughter's cancer treatment. There I met Dr. Tamara Braden, their doctor. I wasn't looking, but she caught my eye. I called our accountant and arranged a $50,000 donation to cover the medical bills. Tamara and I connected over our divorces. When I presented the PID and full receipt to the family, Tamara whispered, I'm so impressed. I'm taking you home for dinner. I laughed and said, then you'll have to drive me home because I came with my mother. She laughed. You can't be serious. That's my mother, Ruth, over there. I pointed. Ruth Parrish. She's one of our greatest contributors. Tamara said, I didn't know the company was named after her. Tamara smiled and asked, what was wrong with the woman divorcing you? She got involved with a man with no morals. It's sad because they're both going down. Ted's wife approached us saying, Tamara, if you need me to start early, I can. I'm not going back with Ted. The kids and I are staying. James, what are you doing here? Jackie asked. I was just talking to Tamara, I said. My mother's over there watching me. How do you know James? Tamara asked. He's divorcing my sister-in-law and will be Ted's new boss. He gave us a great deal on his old house, Jackie said. Why? Tamara asked. No matter what Ted's sister did, Ted is family, I said. If you need any furniture, I have some you can have, Tamara offered. Ted's parents bought the kids' bedroom furniture this morning, Jackie said. After the sale was confirmed when Beth signed the agreement, Ted and I let the ladies talk and walked off. Beth is really struggling with depression, he said. I told her she did it to herself, but everyone else is hurting too, even your daughters. No one understands why you did it, not even you, Ted. She doesn't know it's going to get worse for her before it gets better, I said. John's past behavior is going to become very public. Take it easy with Tamara. She's a beautiful woman and is hurting as much as you." Ted said, "She's always been a keeper." Tamara took my hand and said, "Let's go. I promised you dinner, and we need to shop for a few things." Mom watched us leave. Tamara handed me the keys and asked me to drive to Food City, a small grocery store known for its meat selection. She offered to let me wait, but I went in with her. "What's on the menu?" I asked. "Steak, salad, and dessert if you have." "Room," Tamara said. "Sounds good," I replied. "Let's get a couple of bottles of red wine to go with it." It was after midnight when I got home. Tamara and I had a wonderful evening and planned to meet again the following Saturday. I had the best night's sleep since Beth left. Mom dragged me to church on Sunday. Connie found and put an offer on a house. I told her to submit the purchase agreement to accounting for the check. The girls met their mother for lunch at the mall and later told me it didn't go well. They revealed I had met someone and hoped she would help me heal. They also told Beth what they found on John's computer. The first time she heard about it, Beth was devastated, knowing she lost the chance for sole custody of our daughters. The girls believed she was depressed. Meanwhile, the district attorney laid multiple charges of statutory assault against John. He informed the parents of John's previous sufferers that John had moved in a woman with 2 minor daughters. Most agreed to press charges to protect those girls. John was arrested the next day at home in front of Beth. She realized she would never get custody of her children. What her divorce lawyer wrote in the original petition was coming true for her, not James. 2 months after meeting Tamara, JN was out on bail. Beth and I finalized the divorce, with her receiving $4 million. She got no shares. DNA tests confirmed BU and Bree were my biological daughters. I got sole custody, and Beth had liberal visitation rights as long as it wasn't in John's presence. During mediation, I pointed out John might have wanted her to move in to access my daughters. Hearing this broke Beth. The money I gave her would allow for a quality life if invested properly. I provided her with names of 2 investment advisors. When the divorce was finalized, Connie and Tom moved back with their 5 kids. Mom was delighted to get to know them. She said her life was filled with more love than she had lost, and I saw the truth in that. Connie remained CEO. John's reputation was destroyed, and even his lifelong friends turned against him. His legal bills were mounting. My daughters believed their mother would dump him once the divorce was final. They were concerned about her depression. The takeover was progressing well. We caught up on the contracts delayed by bankruptcy and were ahead of schedule. Most contracts would end up costing less than agreed. We decided to rebate after the final payment was received. We cut labor costs by. I flew out to see the changes and new buildings we acquired. Excess properties were put up for sale at appraised value. Human Resources worked with former employees, and over half became contractors at our new retail locations. We gave them interest-free loans to buy trucks and equipment from us at wholesale prices, along with a QuickBooks accounting program. Ted's first major purchase cut our costs per item by due to increased volume and skilled negotiations. He reorganized our approach, significantly reducing handling costs, proving he was the right choice. Ted and Jackie loved their new home and were slowly personalizing it. Upper management was thrilled because write-offs and losses were cut by. We suspected those in power wanted the bankruptcy handled quietly to hide certain things, and we were the only offer. Tom hired his old firm to appraise our value. Due to our growth, Mom and I were preparing for a barbecue at her place, where Tamara would meet everyone for the first time. I picked up Tamara early so she could meet my daughters before the crowd arrived. Tamara looked stunning in a white dress with monarch butterfly embroidery. We shared a few kisses before heading out. We arrived at Mom's holding hands and Bayu and Bree came over. Sensing my nervousness, Tamara said, "Relax." After introductions, Bayu said, "If you're my dad's girlfriend, he picked a good one." Tamara admitted she was as nervous as I was. The party was a success, and Tamara fit in quickly with my family. Ted, noticing, said, "Looks like you two are falling in love." He suggested we go dancing at Bias later, and I agreed. David informed me that the DA thought John would get at least 7 years due to the number of parents standing against him. "Joanne thinks Tamara is great for you, but worries you'll mess it up," David said. I joked, "Why do women always think it's the man's fault?" Tamara and I watched the swimmers by the pool, and she noticed my discomfort with my daughter's swimsuits. "You're old-fashioned," she said. "Was your father like that?" "Yes," I replied. "He wanted us to be our best and believed actions spoke louder than words. Sadly, that's what drove Beth away." "If my first husband was like you, we'd still be married," Tamara said, and we shared a kiss. Bree teased, "Cool it, Dad. She's not our new mom yet." I ran into the pool to play with my daughters, and Tamara watched us. Later, the girls took pictures and sent them to their mother, showing it was serious. The food was excellent, and I thanked the kitchen staff. Tamara and I were inseparable. We met Ted and Jackie at an Irish restaurant, danced until closing, and I walked Tamara to her door. The next day we shopped before joining my family for dinner. BU texted, "Where are you? We're waiting." Tamara and I arrived, and BU said, "You got some explaining to do, Dad." I grinned, which caught my sister and mother's attention. I asked for champagne and glasses for everyone. Tamara had her hands behind her back, and my mother smiled, realizing what was happening. I announced, "Tamara and I got engaged this afternoon." The room erupted in joy. Bree sent a video to her mom, who later took an overdose of sleeping pills and never woke up. John and Beth blamed each other for their problems, realizing their relationship was based on lust, not love. Everyone took her self-destruction hard. At Beth's grave, Jan said, "I'm sorry for everything." I replied, "I don't believe you," and walked away. That night, John drank most of a bottle of Jack, then used his first weapon to end his life, leaving a note saying, "I'm sorry." A week before Labor Day, Carl, Tom, Mary, Joanne, and Lucy came in with cake and champagne. "What's the celebration for?" I asked. "We paid off the loan in full," Tom said. "We're debt-free, thank God," I said. "I never want another 6 months like the last." "It wasn't all bad," Tom said. "I'm looking forward to being your best man in 8 days, but I never want to hear you say, 'We had to get married.'" Everyone laughed, knowing tomorrow was 2 months along.